Chapter 113. A Reveal of Strength. Ha! Kendall shouted. The large axe made of his Saint Force swung behind him in a motion to chop off the head of the black tiger. The black tiger dodged the battle axe by leaping into the air toward Kendall. Extending its jaws, the black tiger prepared to bite down onto him. Immediately bringing back the battle axe, Kendall brought his Saint weapon up to defend himself, allowing the black tiger to make contact with that instead. The sharp fangs of the black tiger made contact with the hardened weapon with a crunching sound. The force of the impact was so strong that Kendall couldn't help but stagger back a few steps as trail marks were left on the ground. Not too long after, the paws of the black tiger landed on the ground. Before Kendall could regain his composure, the sharp claws of the tiger slashed at Kendall's chest. Kendall became alarmed at the speed of the claws. With his axe being bitten and held down by the tiger, it was useless in this case. At this crucial moment, Kendall sucked in a deep breath and readied his body. At the same time, the black tiger's sharp claws slashed across his chest with a cold ripping sound as his clothes were ripped apart. Along with his clothes, Kendall's blood splattered into the air as the claws made contact. This time, although Captain Kendall had taken the claws to his chest head-on since there wasn't enough time to dodge, it was only a superficial wound. He had been worried that the claws would have brought out a larger amount of damage, but this didn't seem to be the case. Just as the black tiger raked its claws across Kendall's chest, a large broadsword chopped down onto the tiger's back with a ferocious amount of force. As the sword met the tiger's back, a large wound could be seen, but thanks to the resilience of the tiger, the wound was only the size of a palm in length. As he watched the fight with the black tiger, Jianchen shook his head helplessly. In his eyes, whether it was Kendall or Deer, neither of the two had shown their superiority with their weapons. Just looking at how they held the weapon, it was almost as if they didn't know how to use them. They had swung wildly without any sort of form or discipline. It was Deer who had annoyed Jianchen the most. Every single weapon had its own characteristics and special pattern of attack. Deer didn't know how to use a sword at all, so the sword in his hand wasn't able to show off its true power. Deer had even unexpectedly at times used the sword like a knife and recklessly chopped at his enemy. As the battle continued, Captain Kendall and Deer had accumulated a few tiny wounds. At the same time, the black tiger suddenly faced the skies and released a roar that shook the heavens, destroying the silent atmosphere of the magical Beast Mountain range. Right after the shout, the black tiger suddenly released another few strikes before dodging both fighters and turning around to run away. Careful, it wants to run. Block it, for the love of everything, don't let it run away. Standing where the black tiger was attempting to run away to was Chong Ningfeng. Seeing the incoming magical beast, the glint in his eyes never stopped as he brought out his sword in front of him. With a large amount of Saint Force focused into his sword, he stabbed at the black tiger. At such a crucial moment like this, he had to make sure he focused everything on this one strike in order to avoid a long and drawn-out battle. While Chong Ningfeng moved to initiate combat, the other mercenaries weren't idle. Kendall and Deer quickly ran forward to attack the black tiger from behind. Ho! The black tiger emitted another deep growl as it lashed out with its claws once more. Its front paws smashed into Chong Ningfeng's sword, causing it to shake from the strong force. Afterward, the black tiger opened its mouth wide and snapped at Chong Ningfeng. Chong Ningfeng retreated backward while his sword went up ready to parry. Instead, he stabbed at the incoming bite. Ding! Although the sword did not penetrate the black tiger's mouth, it had swiped against the fangs of the beast as it reared its head backward. Biting down on the sword, the tiger had prevented Chong Ningfeng from pulling his sword out and fighting with it. Bastard, go die! At this moment, a loud sound came from behind the black tiger. It was Captain Kendall who had quickly approached it from behind with his large axe raised high into the air, emitting a loud sound as it chopped down onto the tiger's back. At the same time, Deer and a few other saints began to approach the tiger from Chong Ningfeng's side and tried to obstruct the black tiger. The black tiger released its hold on the sword as it turned to face Captain Kendall behind it with his axe raised. Dodging his axe swiftly, the black tiger did not manage to come out unscathed as the axe clipped its body and cut away a patch of fur. Ew! The black tiger let out a pain-filled roar as it turned around and sped off in the opposite direction. However, just as it began to run, Jianchun and the others saw that it was heading toward them, leaving them no choice but to take part in the fight. Seeing the direction the black tiger was going, Xiao Dao and Yun Xian's face changed drastically as they cried out in shock and turned toward the side to escape from it. Kobolds was the first to avoid the black tiger, with an extremely fast speed, running far away. Soon, it was only Jianchun who stood his ground by himself without a single trace of fear on his face. Jianchun dodged quickly. Kendall yelled out before dashing forward in an attempt to block off the black tiger from its path. However, even with his Saint Master strength, his speed wasn't enough to catch up with the Class 2 magical beast. Seeing Jianchun block its path, the black tiger's eyes grew crimson as it released another roar. Quickly afterward, it increased its speed toward Jianchun. Seeing how Jianchun stood his ground without any consideration of moving, the members of the Flame Mercenaries could only cry out in regret as they watched the scene unfold before them. In regards to Jianchun's strength, everyone had only thought that he had the strength of a saint. If a great saint had difficulties fighting this black tiger, then a saint would definitely have no chance of resisting it. Even though the black tiger had already sustained plenty of wounds, the serious state it was in had aroused its ferocious nature. Its fighting strength hadn't taken a decrease in intensity. Instead, it had only grown stronger. Seeing the black tiger pounce toward him, Jianchun's previously dull expression suddenly flashed with a cold light. His 2 fingers wide and 1.33-meter-long silver light wind sword abruptly appeared in his right hand. The only thing that could be seen was a silver light flashing in front of the black tiger. At the same time, Jianchun's body also whirled around, leaning toward the side, about 1 step away from where he had previously been standing. Pong! The black tiger's enormous and cumbersome body heavily fell to the ground, where Jianchun originally had stood. Its body showed no signs of movement at all. The next instant, crimson blood began to rush out of the black tiger's neck and gradually pour over the uneven ground, spreading in all directions. Just as he was swiftly charging forward, Captain Kendall's advancement was abruptly halted. He stared blankly at the black tiger that was now motionless on the ground. Kendall quietly stood in his tracks as he looked at Jianchun, who stood there with an unchanged expression. Kendall's eyes were filled with astonishment and incredulity. He had just seen an unimaginably fast, blurred figure of a sword flash before the black tiger's eyes at an insane speed. Right after, the black tiger had collapsed to the ground, completely still. Captain Kendall's gaze finally fell onto the 2 fingers wide silver sword in Jianchun's hand. He noticed that there wasn't a single trace of blood dirtying the glossy and dazzling blade. Yet it was because of this that Kendall felt even more shocked. In the short instant he looked at Jianchun, his gaze changed countless times. From doubt to amazement, from disbelief to shock, the emotions flickering through his eyes one after another. At that moment, the remaining 5 saints finally rushed over. They hadn't yet discovered that the black tiger was already dead. The 5 of them charged forward and surrounded the black tiger, and they immediately began to strike toward the black tiger's body with their saint weapons in their hands. This magical beast has already died. Everyone, there's no need to fight it anymore. Just as the 5 mercenaries were about to pierce the black tiger's body, Captain Kendall's slightly trembling voice rang out. Hearing this, the 5 great saints all had blank looks on their faces. The saint that had just struck downward had also forcibly stopped his movement midair. Immediately afterward, the 5 people's gazes all shifted in unison to the black tiger's body that had fallen before them, closely inspecting it. Only now did the 5 people clearly see that there was fresh blood violently spurting out of the black tiger's neck. The black tiger's red eyes that had originally held a fierce and terrible glint had now become spiritless voids. Strange, how did this black tiger die? Wasn't it jumping around healthy and alive just a second ago? How did it suddenly die? Hoopa asked in confusion. Hearing this, the remaining 4 great saints all glanced at each other with doubtful expressions. Captain Kendall stared long and hard at Jianchun and said, "This black tiger was killed by Jianchun." "What, Jianchun killed it? Captain, are you serious?" Hearing Captain Kendall's words, Xiao Dao jumped up and one could tell from his expression that he wasn't quite convinced. Xiao Dao wasn't the only one having difficulty accepting this. Everyone in the Raging Flames mercenary group had expressions of disbelief on their faces after hearing those words. Chapter 114. Zhou mercenaries. Everyone in the Flame mercenaries had thought that Jianshen's strength was of the saint level. Even his mercenary badge had declared him to be a D-ranked mercenary. And the most important factor was that Jianshen was so young as well. On the Tianyuan continent, if a 20-year-old was able to become a saint, then their strength was bright, and their potential was unimaginable. For a seemingly 20-year-old like Jianshen, who was capable of killing a Class 2 magical beast, even if it was injured, no one in the proximity would have been able to believe it if they hadn't seen it. However, aside from Captain Kendall, no one saw the faint hazy outline of the sword, or how Jianshen had killed the black tiger. Kendall's eyes wavered on the slender sword of Jianshen's for a moment before growing calm once more and laughed. If you guys don't believe it, then go ask Jianshen yourself. There was a smile on his face as he said this, but how could he not be happy? There was one more expert in his group now. Xiao Dao was the first to give in, running up to Jianshen while looking at him from up to down. His eyes finally settled onto the blood-free light wind sword. Jianshen, please tell me honestly, did you kill the black tiger? Seeing the look of disbelief on Xiao Dao's face, Jianshen nodded his head and said, "That's correct, I killed it." From the very beginning, Jianshen hadn't planned on hiding his strength with lies, so he was very straightforward and honest with Xiao Dao. Wow, no way. Xiao Dao's eyes widened in surprise. In disbelief, Xiao Dao looked at the calm Jianshen and spoke. This fierce Class 2 magical beast was really killed by you? How did you do that, and how come I didn't see how you did it? Hearing Xiao Dao ask these questions, everyone but Kendall stared at Jianshen attentively. Whatever method Jianshen had used to kill the Class 2 magical beast, it was natural for them all to be curious. To them, all they saw was Jianshen suddenly move to the side while using his thin and slender sword in a strange way to kill the black tiger. But none of them had figured out how or what method was used. In the midst of everyone, there was only one person who looked at Jianshen differently. It was Kobolds, who stared at Jianshen in a way that looked as if to say to himself, "It was just as I thought." Jianshen let a grim smile take hold of his lips as he raised his light wind sword. "I used my saint weapon to kill the beast. If you guys didn't see it, it's because my movements were too fast to catch." Hearing what Jianshen said, Captain Kendall thought back to the flash of silver he had just seen, and couldn't help but be afraid. This was because he had no choice but to admit that Jianshen's sword was just far too quick, and he could only see the faint afterimage of the sword. At this moment, Capital Kendall couldn't help but think, if he were to battle an opponent who possessed such speed, would he be able to dodge their attacks? Chang Ningfeng looked at the corpse of the black tiger below and kicked it. The body of the black tiger flipped over by his kick before he bent down to grab the black tiger's head to reveal the cut on its neck. As everyone saw the fatal blow on the black tiger's neck, even Captain Kendall couldn't help but take in a sharp breath, because the wound was way too deep. Just looking at the neck, one could see that 2/3 of it had been completely cut off. Only 1/3 of the skin was attached to the rest of the body, making it seem as if the head of the black tiger was about to snap off at any moment. What was even more unimaginable was that the black tiger had clearly leapt toward him so fast that it looked as if it was gliding. For Jianshen to accurately deliver a fatal blow to its throat, this was an act of skill no one else in the group could match. Deer took in a deep breath of air to calm his beating heart as he looked at Jianshen. With a smile, he said, "Jianshen, before we had only thought that you were a saint, but it seems like your strength was far beyond our imagination. You really did keep us in the dark." Hupa walked on over to Jianshen and extended his hand onto Jianshen's shoulder. "Jianshen, you are far too mean. Be honest with me. How strong are you? You can't be even more amazing than our captain, right?" Hearing what Hupa said, Jianshen could only laugh helplessly. "Brother Hupa, I'm nowhere as amazing as you say. My strength isn't too far away from yours. I am a middle great saint." "That's not right. How could a middle great saint kill a Class 2 magical beast so easily?" Hoopa said with surprise. But instead of asking Jian Chun, he turned around to talk to everyone else. First, let's take care of the body of the black tiger before we continue talking about this. Even as they obeyed Hoopa's command, everyone was still doubtful. However, they didn't say anything and started to prepare the black tiger. This black tiger was quite amazing. Even though it had the strength of a Class 2 magical beast, it was faster than a Class 3 magical beast. After taking the monster core, put the rest of the body within a space belt, so we can sell it for a great amount of money. Kendall said. On the Tianyuan continent, with regards to the type of meat consumed, other than regular beef, most of them came from magical beasts. Magical beast meat was not only tender, but it even smelled good too. Another good benefit was that eating it would also help reinforce the body. Thus magical beast meat were considered a hot-selling item. When it came to high-level magical beasts, the supply could never meet the demand. Jian Chun absorbed the light wind sword back into his body, and watched as the mercenaries stored away the body of the black tiger. He didn't care that it was a Class 2 magical beast, since he could easily kill a Class 3 magical beast at any time. In the hands of Jian Chun, the magical beasts had no way of escaping. The flame mercenaries were different. They had only one Saint Master. Even with their strengths combined, they couldn't be compared to Jian Chun. Killing a peak Class 2 magical beast had been difficult for them. And if it weren't for the fact that Jian Chun had blocked the black tiger, they wouldn't have been able to catch up to it. These magical beasts could be said to be like fish in water. Different from humans, their movements wouldn't be restricted by the lush forest environment. Jian Chun's ears trembled once more, and he turned his head to the side. As his eyes landed on top of a few bushes that started to shake violently, a group of 20 mercenaries wearing steel helmets and full-body armor walked into their line of sight. Just as the fully armed mercenaries walked into their sights, everyone in the flame mercenaries immediately stopped what they were doing and watched the 20 mercenaries with a tense expression. The leader of the 20 mercenaries looked at the flame mercenaries with a cold glare, and then at the halfway stored black tiger. With a wave of his hands, he barked out, "Onward!" commanding the rest of the mercenaries to walk past the flame mercenaries without looking back before finally melting out of sight. In the group's eyes, the flame mercenaries weren't even worth a glance. Those were the Zhou mercenaries. I didn't think we'd come across them here. After the ironclad mercenaries left, Hoopa let out a breath of air. Brother Hoopa, are the Zhou mercenaries that well known? Jian Chun asked. Hoopa nodded his head in response. While the Zhou mercenaries aren't considered the strongest in Wake City, the residents of Wake City will say that the Zhou mercenaries are for sure within the top 10. Their group has around 50 people with their leader at the peak Saint Master level. Under his direct command are 6 middle Saint Masters with around 20 great saints. Their strength is so enormous that our flame mercenaries definitely cannot provoke them. Plus, the Zhou mercenaries have the backing of one of the strongest clans in Wake City, the Zhou clan. With this, there aren't many in Wake City that could challenge them. Oh, Jian Chun looked to where the Zhou mercenaries disappeared to, their image not disappearing from his mind. Jian Chun, if you come across such a person or group in the Magical Beast Mountain Range in the future, please be careful. The Magical Beast Mountain Range is a common place for people to be killed over their items. There are even some people who are mercenaries, but their actions place them on the same level as a bandit. Kendall warned Jian Chun with a serious and grave face. Seeing how serious Kendall was, Jian Chun nodded his head. I'll be careful. After that, the black tiger's corpse had been properly stored within a space belt. Right now we are in an area where Class 2 magical beasts roam. Any deeper in Class 3 magical beasts will be found. So for our sake, let's start to wander around here. Soon after, Kendall and Deer began to address their wounds, which were thankfully not very deep, and wouldn't affect their fighting strength by too much. With a little preparation, the two were ready to get back on the road while staying vigilant of their surroundings. After traveling a short distance, Jian Chun had detected the footprints of another magical beast. But this time it was just like the magical beast before the black tiger. This magical beast was using the cover of the forest to hide 10 meters away from the mercenaries before silently retreating. Jian Chun's eyebrows furrowed together, as he tried to understand just what was happening. On the road, aside from killing that one Class 2 magical beast Black Tiger, he had detected the presence of at least 10 different magical beasts. But none of them had been like the Black Tiger and attacked them. Could it be that it's because there are too many people that the magical beasts are afraid to attack us? Jianshan asked himself. However, this thought was immediately dismissed, for it made no sense at all. Chapter 115. A generous prophet. Jianshan stared at the mercenaries walking in front of him when a flash of realization came. Of course, it's intimidation. This has to be due to the murderous air we're emitting. Jianshan's eyes sparkled as he came to this realization. After seeing so many magical beasts retreat without a fight from this group, it had, after all, been because the entire group was releasing an intimidating amount of killing intent into the air around them. Although the magical beasts lacked wisdom, they were born with superior genetics that granted them formidable instincts. The moment they sensed an opponent they wouldn't be able to beat, their primal instincts would urge them to immediately cower and run away. Thinking about this, Jianshan opened his mouth. One moment please. Everyone suppress your killing intent. Otherwise, we'll just continue about this path without seeing another magical beast. Kendall turned his head in the manner of a fox as he asked, Jianshan, is that useful? Whether it's useful or not will be known after everyone tries it for themselves. Jianshan didn't want to bother to explain. Hearing what Jianshan had said, Kobolds began to think to himself for a moment as the glint in his eye grew brighter and brighter. Everyone should believe in Jianshan for now. These past few times we entered the magical beast forest, we would always come across only a few Class 1 magical beasts. I had always found this to be strange, but until now, I hadn't an answer for it. So we can't outrule what Jianshan has said here. So even kobolds would say something like this. Then let's follow Jianshan's suggestion, said the elder of the Zhou twins. Kobolds had only the strength of a saint, but he was extremely smart. His past suggestions had been of great benefit to the flame mercenaries before, so everyone would readily agree with what he said. After a while, everyone had slowly started to suppress their killing intent to the point where not even a small amount could be felt leaking out. Just as everyone finished suppressing their killing intent, they barely traveled 3 kilometers before a Class 1 magical beast appeared. This made every single member of the Flame Mercenaries happy at the new change of events. Although a Class 1 monster core was worth less than a Class 2 monster core, killing a Class 1 magical beast was an easy task. As long as there were Class 1 magical beasts, the road ahead of them would be filled with generous profit. Haha, so we finally came across a Class 1 magical beast. Captain Kendall, please allow me, Kobolds and Yunxian to deal with this one. Xiao Dao cried out in joy as a small dagger appeared in his hand. Striking at the magical beast, Kobolds and Yunxian followed behind quickly. Seeing the small knife in Xiao Dao's hand, Jianshan shook his head in exasperation. No wonder he was called Xiao Dao. It was because his saint weapon had been a tiny blade. Turning his gaze over to Kobolds and Yunxian, both wielded a two-handed sword. After a while of the three fighting it at such a dangerously close distance, the cooperation of the 3 mercenaries finally killed the magical beast. None of the great saints like Jianshan had any desire to join in on the fight, since all of them had fully believed that the 3 saints would be able to take care of the Class 1 magical beast. Continuing onward, the group couldn't walk for long without coming across a few Class 1 and even some Class 2 magical beasts. But this type of outcome had proved to everyone how Jianshan's theory was true. By nightfall, the group had found a place to rest in and prepared a big campfire. While eating the meat from a magical beast for dinner, they had begun to tidy up the profits they had earned today. Sitting in front of the campfire was Captain Kendall, who watched the flames flicker and dance with a smile as a pile of monster cores sat next to him. Everyone, right now let's talk about today's harvest. Kendall laughed as he looked around himself. Today, we earned a total of 20 monster cores, 7 Class 2 monster cores and 13 Class 1 monster cores, making our profits exceed far more than in the past. At the last few words, Kendall had practically yelled it out, making it clear that he was beyond excited. Haha, we have to thank Jianshan for this. If it weren't for his advice, we wouldn't have come across even a single Class 1 magical beast. Hoopa laughed as he took a drink of his wine. Chong Ning Feng laughed as well. Hoopa is right. Brother Jianchen's contributions for today's profit cannot go unnoticed. From the 7 Class 2 magical beasts, Jianchen had killed 3 of them by himself. Brother Jianchen, come. Take a drink. Chong Ning Feng held out his wine gourd towards him. Jianchen took the gourd from Chong Ning Feng and took a drink joyously. Don't say things like this. When we talk about contributions, everyone in this group had contributed. What can be said for sure, however, is that this time's trip in the Magical Beast Mountain Range has given the group a profit never seen before. Haha, that's correct. With an expert like Brother Jianchen here, our flame mercenaries has gotten a harvest far richer than anything else. Kendall spoke merrily. Seeing this pile of monster cores here makes me feel as if I am one step closer to my dream. Captain, what is your dream? Xiao Dao asked curiously. My dream is for our flame mercenaries to be the #1 mercenary group on the Tianyuan continent. Captain Kendall roared happily as he said, This is my biggest dream. Hearing this, everyone began to laugh with him. The #1 mercenary group on the Tianyuan continent, Kendall, your dream will be impossible to accomplish. Hoopa slapped Kendall on his back in a joking way. That's right, what Hoopa said is right. Kendall, your dream is like something from a fantasy. Following what you say, then I desire to be the strongest expert in the Tianyuan continent. Deer laughed. Ha ha ha, the #1 expert on the continent, you dream highly. Jianchen sat by the fire and smiled as he watched everyone gossip among themselves. Every so often, he would laugh with everyone, and at this moment within his heart, he was completely content for the first time in a long time. Although everyone was joking around with each other, but with each word they spoke to one another revealed the deep bonds of friendships between them all, and even infected Jianchen with it. After the food was eaten and the wine exhausted, everyone began to sprinkle some powder around themselves and the campsite to prevent their chi from escaping and being detected by the surrounding magical beasts. Then, they extinguished the campfire and dug into their tents to rest for the night. Jianchen carelessly reclined within his own tent as he thought about a few things from the day. Right now in his hand were 2 Class 4 monster cores, but those were the only monster cores he had left. Even if he wanted to cultivate, he had no desire to use the Class 4 monster cores. When he would become a Saint Master, then he would use the Class 4 monster cores to cultivate. It looks like tomorrow I should encourage Captain Kendall to go hunting for Class 3 magical beasts. If I can't get at least 3 Class 3 monster cores every day, then I won't be able to cultivate. Jianchen thought to himself, with my strength, I should be able to kill any Class 3 magical beasts with ease, and with Captain Kendall and the group's cooperation, then that means at least 2 Class 3 magical beasts can be fought simultaneously. As long as we don't bump into 4 Class 3 magical beasts at the same time, then there won't be any danger. The Flame Mercenaries should probably be able to stay in the Magical Beast Mountain Range for a month or so. Since the group is quite decent, I should try my best to help procure some monster cores for them during this time. A month after, I'll leave the group and put all my efforts in strengthening myself. I'll treat this month as a break. After all, the antivenom genes within my body from the silver-striped golden snake haven't fully been incorporated into my bloodstream yet. While waiting for this, I need to focus on not sustaining any injuries, otherwise the blood with the antivenom genes will flow away. If I can prevent that, then my bloodstream will have a constant source of antivenom genes flowing through it, granting me the 1000 immunity. By that point, I'll never be able to be poisoned by anyone else, as long as it doesn't reach the levels of a silver-striped golden snake in toxicity. Jianchen lay back onto the ground of his tent as countless thoughts went through his head. Only after some time did he begin to calm himself and listen to his surroundings. After confirming it was safe, he began to sit cross-legged and absorb the world essence in the air to cultivate. Despite the fact that absorbing the world essence would only give him 1% of what he should normally getting, Jianchen had no desire to sleep or give up any chance to increase his own strength. Chapter 116. Magical horn bore the morning came as the sky grew brighter. Jianchen, who was cultivating the world essence, finally opened his eyes. Feeling his internal saint force stay the same size instead of growing, Jianchen could only sigh. Although his current cultivation rate for the world essence was far faster than before, whenever he cultivated, the world essence had practically been devoured by the two glows in his dantian. So his true cultivation rate could practically be ignored. Walking out of his tent, Jianchen stood in the fresh morning atmosphere with his head raised up high to look at the tree branches overhead. In this morning hour, the air was filled with mist, and it was quite dim out as the sun was still rising from the east. Hearing the faint snoring sounds coming from the other tents, Jianchen shook his head in disappointment. With his strong sense of hearing, Jianchen could detect that every single mercenary was fast asleep, and not a single one of them were cultivating. AI, how lazy! How do they think they could increase their strength? On the road of cultivation, while talent is very important, hard work is just as important as talent. Even if a man has the talent, if he does not work hard to cultivate, then his achievements will be no better than a man with no talent, but is hardworking. Jianchen thought to himself. After walking into the forest to get a tree branch, Jianchen restarted the fire and fashioned out a simple grill to cook a few pieces of magical beast meat. Perhaps it was the outside movement that had awoken Kendall, but his head popped out from his tent to stare at Jianchen, who was roasting meat. Jianchen, why is it you're up so early? He laughed. Without even turning around in response, Jianchen said, the sky is getting bright, so it's no longer that early. Captain Kendall looked up at the brightening sky and laughed. Without saying anything, he walked out from his tent and sat down next to Jianchen by the fire. Just as Captain Kendall walked out of his tent, the other members of the group were awakened by the noise as well. Walking out of their tents, they proceeded to pack up and store everything into their space belts as they began to gather around the campfire. Even Hoopa approached the campfire with a gourd of wine as he continued to drink from it. Seeing everyone up and at the campfire, Jianchen looked at Kendall and said, Captain Kendall, what do you plan to do next for our course of action? The next thing we should do is to stay around this area for a while and continue to hunt down Class 1 and 2 magical beasts. Let's continue this for a few days at the Magical Beast Mountain Range, so that we can build up a nice amount of profit before leaving. Kendall said plainly. Hearing this, Jianchen went silent for a moment before opening his mouth to ask, Captain Kendall, I have a suggestion. Would you please listen to it? Kendall's eyes lingered on Jianchen as he laughed and said, Jianchen, whatever suggestion you have, say it. There's no need to think twice about what you're about to say. Although you've joined our flame mercenaries only recently, everyone here is still your brother, so whatever you say won't be taken as an insult. I suggest that we go a bit deeper and directly kill Class 3 magical beasts. Jianchen lovingly looked at Kendall. What, kill Class 3 magical beasts? Jianchen, you've gone crazy. A peak-level Class 2 magical beast was already so difficult to kill, let alone a Class 3 magical beast. Xiao Dao exclaimed in shock. Although the flame mercenaries now had the middle great saint, Jianchen, in Xiao Dao's eyes, killing a Class 3 magical beast with this amount of power was still difficult. Hearing Jianchen's proposal, everyone's eyebrows furrowed together. The flame mercenaries had 1 primary saint master and 6 great saints, but the magical beast had an innate superiority over the humans who were of the same strength level of them. If a person didn't have a battle skill or an attribute, then it would be practically impossible to kill a magical beast on the same level of strength as them. Even if they could, the price they would have to pay for doing so would be tremendous. On this magical beast mountain range where Class 3 magical beast roamed, if the flame mercenaries were to come across a primary Class 3 magical beast, then they would be able to kill it with some difficulty. However, if they were to come across a peak Class 3 magical beast, then they would have no chance at all. After killing a peak Class 2 magical beast, Captain Kendall and Chong Ningfeng had been injured. If it weren't for Jianchen's intervention, then it wouldn't have been possible for them to capture and kill the magical beast. So for that reason, Jianchen's suggestion to kill a Class 3 magical beast to the flame mercenaries was an attempt of suicide. Kobolds looked at Jianchen with a curious glint in his eye. Jianchen, to think that you are suggesting to go kill a Class 3 magical beast. Then I presume that you have the ability to kill a Class 3 magical beast? Hearing kobolds, Jianchen hesitated for a second before nodding his head. As long as we don't come across 3 Class 3 magical beasts, I can safely say we won't be in mortal danger. Everyone's eyes widened in astonishment. Doubt and disbelief clouded their eyes as they stared at Jianchen. Jianchen, so what you're saying is that as long as we don't come across 3 Class 3 magical beasts at the same time, then we won't be in any danger at all. Kendall said with a deep breath. If what Jianchen said was true, then Kendall would want to bring Jianchen with him to go kill some Class 3 magical beasts. After all, Class 3 magical beasts had a body and a monster core that were far more valuable than a Class 2 magical beast. Jianchen, do you really have enough strength to kill a Class 3 magical beast? Deer asked to clarify. Although Jianchen had killed a peak Class 2 magical beast, but the black tiger had already been injured, so its strength was far different than a Class 3 magical beast in perfect condition. That's right, Jianchen. Something like this can't be randomly said and tried, otherwise you might throw away your life in the attempt. Changning Feng said with worry. Jianchen smiled at everyone. Despite everyone's reaction to this suggestion, Jianchen wasn't unhappy with them. After all, killing a Class 3 magical beast was a task far too difficult for the flame mercenaries. Regardless of whether they were careful or not, they would still sustain a few injuries. Everyone should believe me this time. If we really cannot beat a Class 3 magical beast, then we at least have enough strength to run away. Jianchen said with firm conviction. Hearing this, everyone's eyes gathered at the figure of Captain Kendall. Regarding such an important decision like this, it would be for the best for Captain Kendall to make the final decision. Kendall took in a deep breath of air as he stared at Jianchen. Seeing how Jianchen seemed to have complete faith in himself, Kendall bit his lips and finally made a decision. Then how about this? We'll believe in what he says this time. Jianchen, if you truly do believe yourself, then I'll let you lead the group for a while. Whatever we do will be up to you to guide us. Does anyone have any problems? Kendall said to everyone else. I've no problems. No problems here. I don't have any problems here either. Kendall's decision had quickly convinced everyone else without anyone having a disagreement. Jianchen's face had a big smile on it as he said, Then, since everyone has confidence in me, I will definitely make sure not to disappoint anyone. Let me plan a few things then. Jianchen's voice stopped for a moment before saying, Let me walk in the front while everyone else take the same positions. If we come across a Class 3 magical beast, then let me up first while everyone else surrounds it to prevent any other attacks. If any other magical beasts come, then you guys should attack those. But remember to take care of your own life. As long as you can stall the other magical beasts from attacking me, that'll be enough. When they heard Jianchen's plan, everyone looked at each other with a dubious look. They had felt extremely curious about this plan. To have a middle great saint fight against a Class 3 magical beast by himself? This sort of plan was kind of unpleasant to hear, since they all took a Class 3 magical beast seriously. After eating breakfast, everyone finished packing up their things and headed for the deeper parts of the magical beast mountain range. This time, however, the formation of the group was slightly different, with Jianchen walking by himself 10 meters ahead of the group, who retained their original positions. Not a single member of the group emitted any murderous intent while traveling, causing some Class 1 magical beasts to be attracted to them. However, since they wanted to continue on their journey quickly, they didn't let Xiao Dao or the other saints fight the magical beasts. Instead, the Class 1 magical beasts were given to the great saints to kill. As the group continued to walk into the forest, the terrain grew more and more nasty as swamps greeted their eyes in every direction. All sorts of toxic plants and insects also came into their field of view, and sometimes a man-eating magical beast would come out of nowhere. On the road, everyone was very attentive to their surroundings. While listening to the sounds underneath their feet, they were also cautiously looking around themselves. At this point, a few Class 2 magical beasts had attacked them, but they continued onward. The amount of Class 1 magical beasts began to lessen, while they encountered a Class 2 magical beast every so often. At that moment, the leading Jian Chen's ears twitched, and then he suddenly stopped in his tracks, raising a hand to signal the flame mercenaries behind him to stop as well. Seeing Jian Chen's movement, everyone in the mercenary group had stopped as well, and nervously looked carefully at their surroundings. Although Jian Chen had repeated time after time that as long as 3 Class 3 magical beasts didn't attack them at the same time, then they would be in no danger at all, everyone was still extremely nervous. After all, they were up against a Class 3 magical beast this time, instead of the normal Class 2 magical beasts. Although there was only one class apart from each other, the difference in strength between a Class 2 and a Class 3 magical beast was vast. At that moment, the cry of a wild beast rang out from ahead of them. The grass around them violently swayed as a great, 2-meter-tall magical beast appeared in the people's line of vision. This magical beast looked like a wild boar. It had a long nose, and the only thing different from a wild boar was the fact that it had fierce, inch-long, snow-white teeth protruding from the corners of its mouth. It also had a single horn sprouting from its forehead. Captain Kendall surveyed the magical beast in front of them. His expression turned grave as he said, "Magical horned boar. Jian Chen, be careful. That's a Class 3 magical horned boar." Jian Chen nodded his head as he stared impassively at the magical horned boar. The silver glow of his light wind sword gradually appeared in his right hand, as it was enveloped by a hazy glow of light that covered the entire blade. "We'll act as we had originally planned. Let me deal with this magical beast. You guys just keep yourselves safe." As soon as he said this, Jian Chen raised his sword and swiftly charged at the magical horned boar. Chapter 117. Fighting strength that causes others to quake in fear. The flame mercenaries' eyes grew wide, as they all watched Jian Chen charge at the magical horned boar alone. Their gazes were all locked onto Jian Chen's figure that appeared neither tall nor sturdy. Everyone wanted to witness exactly how Jian Chen was going to kill the Class 3 magical horned boar. Captain Kendall had a serious expression on his face, as he sent a powerful saint force rushing out from his right hand. A wide axe gradually materialized in his hands, which he grasped tightly as his fierce eyes staring unblinkingly at Jian Chen's frail-looking body. As soon as Jian Chen was unable to resist the Class 3 magical beast's attacks, he charged to the front lines without any hesitation to save Jian Chen. Among this group, he was most likely the only person that could contend against the magical horned boar, albeit with difficulty. Jian Chen was like a monster as he whipped up fine winds with his swift charge toward the magical horned boar in front of him. The light wind sword in his hand became a silver glow, as if turning into a slim and spectacular flash of lightning that pierced toward the magical horned boar's throat. Seeing the silver light, the corners of the magical horned boar's eyes flashed with a fierce glow, faintly expressing a dull look of concentration. It gave a low roar, and its heavy body quickly retreated. At the same time, it tried to turn its entire upper body to the side, as it attempted to evade Jian Chen's sword coming at its throat. Although the magical horned boar had already tried its hardest to evade, its enormous body was really too cumbersome. In addition, speed was originally the magical horned boar's weakness. There was no way it could dodge Jian Chen's blade that was as fast as lightning. Pooh! The light wind sword pierced deeply into the magical horned boar's throat, instantly severing its life force. Immediately afterward, the magical horned boar's entire body suddenly grew rigid. Its pair of large eyes gradually lost their feeling, and before it could even give a miserable cry, its entire body fell to the ground with a bang. Jian Chen pulled out the bloody sword from the magical horned boar's throat. As he casually moved it, all of the blood on the light wind sword began to gradually flow downward. It slowly gathered at the point's end, before finally dripping onto the ground, drop by drop. Absorbing the light wind sword back into his body, Jian Chen revealed a satisfied smile on his face. After he had broke through to become a middle great saint, his fighting strength was far better than when he was a primary great saint. No matter if it was the speed of his light wind sword or the strength of the sword chi around, both had become even stronger than before. Right now killing a Class 3 magical beast was nothing more than a simple task. Looking at the Class 3 magical horned boar lying on the ground, Jianchen indifferently said, "Captain Kendall, I'll leave this Class 3 magical beast carcass for you to handle." Not a single sound could be heard from behind Jianchen in response to his words. Sensing that there was something odd, Jianchen turned around, only to see that all of the flame mercenaries were currently looking at the magical horned boar, on the ground blankly with round eyes. All of them had astonished looks of disbelief. Seeing everyone's brilliant expression, Jianchen shook his head with a bitter smile. To the flame mercenaries, a Class 3 magical beast was something far beyond their strength. They couldn't kill it in one blow, and if they were hit with one blow, then that would be the end for them. To the mercenaries whose strength was weaker than a Class 3 magical beast, this display of strength shocked them to their core. The people were in a shocked daze for quite a while. Captain Kendall was the first to regain his senses. He exhaled deeply to slowly suppress his shock, and he looked at Jianchen with a complicated look as he said, "Jianchen, your strength is too abnormal. Even a Class 3 magical beast was utterly unable to stand up against you. You were able to kill it as easy as pie. This is a Class 3 magical beast, you know." Soon afterward, everyone was gradually brought back to their senses, as they looked at Jianchen, with a complicated look of shock and disbelief. Chang Ningfeng let loose a long breath of air and said, "AI, your strength is unbelievable. This was a Class 3 magical beast, but I'm having trouble thinking that this was nothing more than a Class 1 magical beast, from how well you handled it." Hearing this, everyone simultaneously nodded their heads as Deer said, "Jianchen, is your strength really at middle great saint? Seeing how easily you killed this Class 3 magical beast, I'm having a hard time believing you're not at the great saint master level yet." Deer looked at Jianchen with a complex stare mixed in with a look of envy. After all, Jianchen was much younger than him, so who wouldn't be envious of his strength? Kobolds hesitated for a bit before opening his mouth to say, "Jianchen, could it be that what you used just now was a high-level battle skill? I was completely unable to tell when exactly your sword had pierced the magical horned boar's throat." "That's right, I didn't see it clearly. Actually, I couldn't even see a hint of a shadow," Hoopa added in an extremely depressed tone. Hearing this, Jianchen smiled and said, "It can't really be said to be a battle skill. My swordplay is just on the faster side. It was so fast that we couldn't even see it clearly. That speed is a bit too terrifying," Deer said in a low voice. Kendall walked up to the body of the magical horned boar and said, "Okay, let's not talk about this for now. Everyone come help me take care of the body." Soon after, everyone walked up to the body of the magical horned boar, as Xiao Dao took out his saint weapon, which was a small dagger. Fiercely cutting into the stomach of the magical horned boar, he attempted to extract the monster core. However, the moment he had stabbed into the boar's stomach, the blade was only capable of making a small finger-sized hole in it. Although the defense of the magical horned boar wasn't all that outstanding, it was still a Class 3 magical beast. Their leathery skin was still well known, so with Xiao Dao's saint-level strength, if he wanted to cut into the stomach of the magical horned boar, he would have to expend a great amount of effort in order to make a larger cut through the skin. Seeing how Xiao Dao could only cut a small finger-sized hole in the stomach of the magical horned boar, Deer shook his head and walked up beside Xiao Dao. "Xiao Dao, let me give it a try." A great amount of saint force was concentrated around his right arm, as a two-handed sword appeared in his palm. "The leather skin of this Class 3 magical beast is quite tough. I've learned a lot today." Xiao Dao cursed as he obediently stood aside for Deer. Soon after, Deer used his two-handed sword to cut open the belly of the boar, and then extracting the bloody Class 3 monster core from within. Wiping it clean of blood, he walked up to Jianchen and Kendall with some hesitation, before offering it up to Jianchen. "Brother Jianchen, this Class 3 magical horn boar was killed by you, so therefore, the monster core should go to you." Not waiting for Deer to finish his sentence, Jianchen cut him off saying, "Uncle Deer, in accordance to the group rules, this monster core should be given to Captain Kendall to decide, and in the end everyone will give their agreement. This probably isn't the best thing to do. Deer looked hesitant. There's nothing wrong with that, Uncle Deer. Bring the monster core to Captain Kendall to decide. Jianshan said firmly, without any room for Deer to argue against. Fine then. Deer had no choice but to hand the monster core over to Captain Kendall. Kendall gazed deeply at Jianshan, but did not shirk away. Instead, he reached his hand out to accept the Class 3 monster core and said, "In that case, I'll take care of this monster core for now. Once we leave Magical Beast Mountain Range, I'll distribute all the profits based on contribution." Afterward, the group of people allocated one person's space belt to store the magical horn boar's carcass. And then they continued their journey. A Class 3 magical beast's body could be sold for quite a bit of money, so the flame mercenaries obviously wouldn't let this opportunity slip past them. Time quickly passed. Unknowingly, the group had already stayed in the Magical Beast Mountain Range for 10 days. These 10 days were definitely the happiest and most enjoyable moments for the flame mercenaries. That was because during this period, aside from the first day, the remaining days were filled with Jianshan taking the lead to hunt Class 3 magical beasts in the mountain range. Because Jianshan's actual combat strength had long surpassed a Saint Master's, he had absolutely no difficulty killing the Class 3 magical beasts. Moreover, ever since his strength had reached the mid-Great Saint level, Jianshan hadn't once received an injury from fighting a Class 3 magical beast at close range. During this period of time, the flame mercenaries had long since stopped wondering about how strange the powerful strength Jianshan displayed was. As Jianshan revealed more and more of his strength, his position in the flame mercenary group continued to rise. Right now, almost everyone, including Captain Kendall, either held extreme respect for him or was incomparably polite. This was because in 10 days, Jianshan had brought about a great amount of profit for the flame mercenaries. In these past few days, Jianshan had killed over 100 Class 3 magical beasts by himself and 300 Class 2 magical beasts, while the flame mercenaries did not kill as many by themselves. They had simply stood behind Jianshan as he killed the magical beasts and extracted the monster cores from the magical beasts' corpses. Despite this, no one in the group had complained about the unfairness. Instead, they thought of this to be quite joyful. To them, this was as simple as picking up money. By nightfall, the full moon was suspended overhead in the night sky and illuminated the land below in its white glow. Within one of the larger areas of the Magical Beast Mountain Range, a large bonfire lit up the night as the embers from the fire flickered and danced into the sky. 10 people wearing the fur of magical beasts sat around the bonfire. These relaxed figures were the flame mercenaries. These past days we have harvested 125 Class 3 monster cores, 364 Class 2 monster cores, and not even 30 Class 1 monster cores. Other than that, we also have a few Class 3 magical beast corpses. Kendall proclaimed as he examined the items the group had taken. Hearing Kendall's exclamation, everyone let loose an extremely happy smile. Because of this type of harvest, everyone was extremely satisfied. However, everyone knew that if they didn't have the help of Jianshan, they wouldn't even have a single Class 3 monster core. After all, killing one Class 3 magical beast was already too difficult for them, and killing even half the amount of Class 2 magical beasts would have been impossible to do by themselves. Chapter 118, Class 5 Cub. After 10 days of constant hunting, I'm sure everyone is tired. Plus, the rations we have in our space belts are definitely almost all gone. So tomorrow morning, let's go back to Wake City and rest there. Does anyone else object? Kendall asked. Everyone looked at Jianshan as Deer asked, Jianshan, why don't you make this decision? Jianshan poked at the campfire with a tree branch and said absent-mindedly, Captain Kendall's decision is the best. I have no disagreements. Captain Kendall hesitated for a moment before looking back at everyone else. Since Brother Jianshan has no disagreements, then tomorrow morning we shall leave the Magical Beast Mountain Range and rest up for a few days in Wake City. Brother Jianshan had fought Class 3 magical beasts continuously, so I am sure even he is tired by now. For the first time, Captain Kendall's voice held some hesitation in it. Class 3 magical beasts were something the flame mercenaries had always wanted to provoke in order to test their own strength. These past few days of following Jian Chen's lead, they had picked up many Class 3 magical beast corpses and strengthened themselves. This type of situation had given the flame mercenaries an incomparably matchless amount of happiness. If their conditions allowed it, then everyone would have loved to stay around the magical beast mountain range for a few more days. However, they knew in their hearts that while Jian Chen had suffered virtually no injuries after fighting battle after battle against Class 3 magical beasts, he had to be exhausted. Jian Chen needed to rest and readjust his body. When we return, the very first thing we have to do is to handle the corpses of the magical beast. The longer they stay in the space belts, the faster they'll go stale, which will bring down the price. Xia Dao poked at his space belt as he spoke. Following Xiao Dao's action, the others subconsciously reached out to touch their space belts as well. Right now, each of them had 1 to 2, and some even had 3 to 4 smaller Class 3 magical beast carcasses stored within them. In addition, the items originally inside their space belts had all been transferred to Captain Kendall. After all, none of their family properties were worth much anyways. At that moment, a savory scent wafted into the air from the campfire. It was the smell of the pieces of the magical beast meat being cooked to a golden color, as the tender fat began to drip down slowly, due to caramelization. The fat continued to drip down to the floor, causing everyone to hear it. Smelling the dense aroma let loose everyone's appetites. Some people's stomachs even began to growl loudly. Suddenly, Jian Chen's ears twitched. He abruptly turned around to look behind him. The moment he looked back, he saw that a petite animal-like body shot toward him from the distance, as fast as lightning. Jian Chen's vision blurred for a mere second, but that was enough time for the petite figure to approach him. "Everyone be careful," Jian Chen cried out, unable to have enough time to identify what type of magical beast this was. Both of his hands slapped onto the ground as he leapt up from his sitting posture on the floor. Flying in midair, Jian Chen's light wind sword instantaneously appeared within Jian Chen's right hand. The rest of the flame mercenaries weren't slow to react either. As soon as they heard Jian Chen's cry, all of the people had stood up from their spots and materialized their spirit weapons, cautiously surveying their surroundings. Jian Chen's body rolled through the air until he landed 3 meters away on the ground. His eyes stared at the campfire and then at the small beast right next to it. The little beast looked quite adorable. It had pure gold fur which shone under the fire's illumination, practically radiating a mist of light. Its eyes were locked onto the barbecue cooking over the fire, which was currently emitting an extremely savory aroma. It continuously licked its lips with its small tongue to wet them, as its front claws eagerly shifted on the ground where it stood. It looked like it was extremely impatient. Seeing that the small beast in front of him wasn't even 0.33 m long, Jian Chen immediately let loose a breath. Based on the small beast's appearance, it was evident that it had been enticed by the magical beast meat's delicious aroma. "Jian Chen, just what happened exactly?" Kendall's voice rang out. The moment he had heard Jian Chen's voice, he had immediately went on guard as he observed what was happening around him. But whatever was happening he didn't notice. Jian Chen bitterly smiled. "Nothing really. It was just that thing suddenly ran out." Jian Chen extended his finger to point at the little beast currently standing in front of the fire. Hearing this, everyone looked at the direction Jian Chen pointed at. It was only at that moment that they realized there was a small beast there. "That's..." A few people exchanged surprised glances. Kendall walked forward a few steps as he investigated the area, and then at the small beast there, before revealing a thinking expression. "It looks like this is the cub of a magical beast. Jian Chen, do you think you can figure out where this cub came from, or what type of magical beast it is?" Jian Chen unhurriedly approached the little beast, and slowly crouched down to survey the little beast. The beast wasn't the least bit afraid of the strangers surrounding it. It didn't even bother to glance at them. Its eyes were instead completely locked onto the cooking meat. It might have been because it wasn't scared of people, or it might have been because it was still young, but it did not seem afraid at all. Seeing the little beast in such a state, Jian Chen couldn't help but smile. He reached a hand out to grab one of the meat skewers and ripped off a piece of the golden cooked meat. He then waved it in front of the beast's nose, letting it smell it a bit more. Aolo, aolo, aolo. The little beast's eyes were now tightly locked onto the piece of meat that Jianchen had ripped off, and it began to stamp its 4 hooves impatiently. Finally, its entire body stood up, and it continued to cry out "Ao-ao," as saliva fell from the corners of its mouth. Seeing how much the little beast wanted to eat the piece of meat, Jianchen stopped enticing it, and directly placed the meat into its mouth. The little beast immediately extended its 2 front claws to tightly hug the piece of meat. Then it directly placed it into its mouth to wolf it down, completely unafraid of how hot it was. Jianchen extended his hand to turn the cub. At this moment he was sizing it up, and the cub hadn't yet realized that it was being looked at by a few other people. It continued to stuff the pieces of magical beast meat in its mouth. Looking at the cub, Jianchen's face gradually grew brighter as an excited smile appeared on it. Jianchen, have you figured out what type of magical beast this is, or where it's from? Chang Ningfeng asked as he watched the reactions on Jianchen's face. Jianchen slowly put down the cub as he said excitedly, "If I'm not wrong about my information, then this should be the cub of the Class 5 Golden Fur Tiger King." What, the cub of a Class 5 Golden Fur Tiger King? Jianchen, are you sure you aren't mistaken? Kobolds covered his mouth in surprise, his tone unable to hide his astonishment. Everyone else had similar expressions of shock and disbelief as well. The cub of the Class 5 Golden Fur Tiger King. Although it wasn't too strong, this type of magical beast still had a plethora of superior innate advantages. When it becomes an adult, it would have the strength of a Earth Saint Master without any obstructions. It could even be said that it was smooth sailing for it, while having a large amount of room to improve, unlike regular magical beasts. After its adulthood, there was still an endless road of cultivation to be had so it could slowly improve its strength. But whether or not it could cultivate long enough to become a Class 5 magical beast, that could not be said for sure. Jianchen sized up the little beast that was currently eating with relish, and said, "I shouldn't be wrong." Jianchen had already read quite a few books about magical beasts back at Kargath Academy's library. Thus, Jianchen knew majority of the magical beast types in Tianyuan continent. The most eye-catching thing on a golden fur tiger king was its pure golden fur, as well as the symbol for king being imprinted onto it. It was for this reason that Jianchen could say for sure what type of beast this was. Currently, all of their hearts were uncontrollably racing. Although a Class 5 magical beast cub's strength was far from an actual Class 5, as well as the fact that it would still take quite a while for it to reach adulthood, its value was far more than an adult Class 5 magical beast. This was because an adult Class 5 magical beast already possessed basic intelligence, and would rather die than become a human's pet or mount. That's why taming an adult magical beast was incomparably difficult. However, a young magical beast was different, because it had yet to mature. Taming it was extremely easy. Moreover, it was much easier to foster a relationship with one. If one started taming a Class 5 magical beast while it was still a cub, it would not only have the strength of any other Class 5 magical beast when it reached adulthood, it would also continue to grow, and could reach Class 6. There was even a possibility that it could become a Class 7 magical beast. The most important thing was that during this time, the bonds between the cub and its tamer would be very deep. This way, there would be no need to expend as much effort to get a strong magical beast that would be extremely loyal to its master and would never betray him. So for that reason, the cub of a Class 5 magical beast would be priceless in the market. If the cub of a Class 5 magical beast were to appear, then there would be many strong parties that would try to fight over it. I hadn't thought that we'd actually discover a Class 5 magical beast cub. Moreover, it was a cub that approached us by itself. Our luck is really amazing, Xiao Dao said in excitement. Haha, if we sell this Class 5 magical beast cub, I wonder how much money we can get. Hoopa said in a tone that was just as excited. He looked at the golden fur tiger king cub, as if it were a mountain of glittering gold. Kobold's face grew even more excited for a moment, before turning serious. It doesn't matter whether or not if we can sell it for a higher price. If we can capture it for sure, then in our future, we won't ever need to come back to the magical beast mountain range and hunt for money. Right now, the only problem is that the parents of this cub are somewhere. If we were to come across them somehow, then we would definitely not make it out alive. After all, a Class 5 magical beast is far beyond our capabilities. Kobold's gaze became more concentrated as he surveyed his surroundings before saying, "The most important question is, how are we going to transport the cub?" Chapter 119. Fighting over the cub. Hearing Kobold's words, the smile on everyone's faces slowly dissipated. What he had said wasn't false. If they were to try and take the cub of the Golden Fur Tiger King, they would encounter a multitude of trouble. Even if they didn't come across the parents of this cub, bringing it back to Wake City would still be a tremendously difficult task. After all, a cub was a living animal. It could not go into the space within a space belt without dying, since the inside of the belt was uninhabitable. Thus, they would have to transport it from the outside. But since the road would have many groups of people, the news of a Golden Fur Tiger King cub would quickly spread about. By that point, many strong factions would come and try to provoke the Flame Mercenaries. With their current strength, this would be something they wouldn't be able to fend off. Ha 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 ha. If you don't have the power to carry the cub of the Golden Fur Tiger King out, then why don't you just hand it over to us? At that moment, a loud shout with unconcealed joy was heard. The dark figure of a person came into view, as well as a whole group of people accompanying him. They quickly surrounded the Flame Mercenaries. There were 20 people in total, with each of them wearing a steel helmet and metal armor. Many of the mercenaries were wearing broken armor, while some of them had blood dripping from them. Just one look at them was enough for people to tell that they had just been in a fight. Seeing such a large crowd of people come out of nowhere, everyone in the Flame Mercenaries suddenly grew unsightly expressions. But the moment they saw the little emblems on their chests, their faces immediately lost all color. Even Kendall was deathly pale as he spoke. "So it's the Zhou Mercenaries." His voice trembled with each syllable. "Ha ha ha ha. You have quite the eyesight to recognize us. Hand over the tiger cub to us nice and easy. You already know the consequences if you don't." The leader spoke with a cold gaze directed at each person in front of him in disdain. However, as he looked at the still-eating tiger cub, an unconcealed happiness could be seen in his eyes. No one in the Flame Mercenaries said a thing as their faces continued to lose color rapidly. Jianchen swept his eyes over each individual Zhou mercenary. With his power, he could already determine how strong each mercenary roughly was. In his eyes, aside from the 2 Saint Masters, everyone else was a great saint. Those 2 Saint Masters, however, were still higher than Captain Kendall, and was probably at least middle Saint Master level. Jianchen slowly let loose a small breath of air as he looked around himself. With his strength, as long as there wasn't a great Saint Master, there wouldn't be a problem. Eolo. By this point, the cub had already finished eating all of the magical beast meat given to it, and was now hungrily staring at the still grilling pieces over the bonfire. It began to cry out non-stop for the meat and hunger, completely unaware of the danger that was looming around it. Jianchen slowly crouched down and took the cub into his chest. At the same time, each and every member of the Zhou mercenaries glared at Jianchen with a cold look, emitting murderous intent. "Kid, hand over the cub to me now. Otherwise you'll be dying here and now." The leader of the Zhou mercenaries shouted at Jianchen. Hearing this, Jianchen returned their stares back at them without a hint of anger in them. Instead, he began to smile and said, "Even if we hand over the cub to you, you won't let us go because you're afraid that we'll spread news of the cub and bring about unavoidable trouble onto you. Moreover, the trouble stirred would be quite major." The leader sneered as he stared at Jianchen. "You're quite intelligent, but there are times that the smarter a person is, the sooner they die. And so sometimes, a man doesn't want to be intelligent. Being stupid would allow them to live a little longer." As he spoke, a great amount of Saint force was being concentrated within his right arm, quickly forming a long sword. The leader pointed the tip of the sword at Jianchen and said coldly, "Kid, I'll give you one last chance. Hand over the cub obediently, Otherwise, I swear I'll make you die a wretched death." The man growled as the other Zhou mercenaries began to take out their own saint weapons and surrounded Jian Chun to suppress him with their intimidation. At the same time, the flame mercenaries had decided not to be outdone and started to materialize their own saint weapons. They were extremely grave as they internally understood that even if they handed over the cub to the Zhou mercenaries, they would still be killed. If it was the other way around, they would have done the same thing and not let the Zhou mercenaries go. So if they were to die, they wanted to take down a Zhou mercenary along with them. Even if they couldn't, the Zhou mercenaries definitely wouldn't escape from this without a few casualties. Seeing the reactions of everyone in the flame mercenaries, the leader of the Zhou mercenaries sneered with disdain before looking back to Jian Chun and saying, "Kid, no more kidding around. If you hand over the cub to me, I'll spare your lives." Right now, the cub was in Jian Chun's arms. Seeing how Jian Chun had no intentions of letting it go, the man was afraid that if he were to act rashly, Jian Chun would kill the cub. Jian Chun evidently knew why the man was hesitating and couldn't help but laugh. His left hand held the howling cub while his right hand patted the shaggy fur on top of its head. "You wanted this cub so badly, so why aren't you coming to get it? Could it be you have the guts to say you want it, but not the guts to take it?" The cold stare intensified onto Jian Chun as the man's face froze impassively. In his heart he had felt a strange premonition. Jian Chun's reaction was completely abnormal, letting him feel a bit uneasy. "You, bring me that cub." The leader called out to a nearby mercenary. Yes, the mercenary didn't hesitate at all, as he walked toward Jian Chun carefully, as if to test and see what Jian Chun would do. When the mercenary cautiously walked up to Jian Chun unexpectedly didn't show any signs of movement. Instead, he simply stood there with an unchanging smile. Despite this, the mercenary still didn't dare to let his guard down. He slowly reached his hand out to carefully grab at the cub in Jian Chun's hands. At the same time, every mercenary in the Zhou mercenaries clenched their saint weapons tightly. Even the leader was growing tenser by the second as he looked at Jian Chun. In a flash, the mercenary had succeeded in taking the club despite the struggle it had put up. From beginning to end, the mercenary had been extremely wary of any sudden attacks by Jian Chun. At that moment, Jian Chun's eyes grew cold as the light wind sword appeared in his right hand. Transforming into a silver ray of light, it flashed towards the mercenary's throat like silver lightning. Although the mercenary was attentively guarding against Jian Chun, the sword strike was far too fast for him to dodge. The moment the flash of silver lightning had passed, the man had only felt a small pain in his throat. And right under his eyes, the image of a silver sword had abruptly appeared. In the next second, the mercenary choked and wordlessly screamed in agony as he fell to the ground. As for the Class 5 cub, it had flown through the air, fallen down onto the ground while howling loudly. Jian Chun's sword was so fast that even if the mercenary had forewarning about blocking against this sword, he would have failed. Jian Chun's sword was far too fast for the other man to dodge, what was almost second nature for Jian Chun to aim for. The leader of the Zhou mercenaries looked a bit at loss as he watched Jian Chun pierce the throat of the mercenary, with an incredulous look on his face. He was secretly astonished at how fast the sword was traveling. Even with his peak Saint Master strength, he had only seen the faint image of the sword, and was utterly incapable of seeing it clearly. In a short moment, the leader regained his thoughts as he squashed the astonishment within his heart. "Everyone forward. Slaughter without mercy, but do not harm the cub," he commanded as he raised his sword with his armored hand. With an ear-piercing whistle, his weapon slashed downward at Jian Chun's head. Within the Zhou mercenaries, the only other Saint Master expert had pulled out his sword and mimicked the leader's action by trying to cut down Jian Chun. From his initial strike, the two Saint Masters had already realized that Jian Chun wouldn't be an easy opponent to fight against. So the two Zhou mercenaries of the Saint Master level silently agreed to kill Jian Chun first. On the other side, the Flame mercenaries began to fight with the other members of the Zhou mercenaries, embroiling the place into the flames of war. Although the Flame mercenaries didn't scatter apart, they gathered around in a circle and had the three saints like Xiao Dao protected within. In this type of battle, the saints like Xiao Dao would have no chance to battle, and would only die a vain death if they tried. The 5 great saints, and the primary Saint Master Kendall formed the outside circle, and were prepared to fight any of the Zhou mercenaries to the death. However, because of the difference in strength between the two sides, the fight didn't last long. The flame mercenaries were already at a clear disadvantage, and were already being pressured by the Zhou mercenaries, to the point of being able to only defend. With his sword in hand, Jian Chen's imposing manner drastically changed. His demeanor was like a sharp sword that had just been unsheathed, giving the people around him the sensation of being shown off to. In an instant, the sword suddenly grew colder, and somehow seemed to become sharper. To the enemies of the same rank, it was almost as if the sword was robbing them of their courage. Chapter 120. The shocking arrival of the Tiger King Jianchen simply had no desire to make contact with the sword of the leader of the Zhou mercenaries. Narrowly dodging the giant sword of the leader, Jianchen's sword disappeared into a blur of silver light, once more as Jianchen stabbed at the leader. Although Jianchen's fighting ability was no weaker than a Saint Master, that was only because of his fighting strength. The Saint force within his body was still weaker than the one within a Saint Master by quite the amount. So if Jianchen's light wind sword were to make contact with the leader of the Zhou mercenaries, then Jianchen would be the one at a disadvantage here, making collisions between the two an unwise choice. Jianchen's strongest advantage was his fast swordplay, which would allow him to beat anyone within his strength level, before they could even react to it. Even for those who were a grade higher than him in strength, they would only be able to see the faint and blurry images of the sword. With his profound steps, Jianchen would even be able to fight against anyone higher than himself provided they weren't a wind-attributed saint. Against a saint force that was stronger than his own, unless it was absolutely necessary, Jianchen did not want to take any risks, and end up facing against his weak point. Seeing Jianchen use such an inconceivable speed to attack his throat, the leader's face became extremely serious as his saint force began to frantically circulate within his body. With his body in a peak state of fitness, the man's body turned around, and then leapt to the side in order to narrowly dodge Jianchen's otherwise fatal sword. Although Jianchen had been fast in his movements, the peak Saint Master Strength leader had only been forced to dodge to the side. Although, at the same time, looking at the shoulder plate of the man, Jianchen could see the white scar traces from where the light wind sword had grazed by. With a turn of his wrist, the light wind sword had suddenly moved in a way that made it look like a tiny snake under the skillful hand of Jianchen. As the sword swished through the air, it pursued the nearby figure of the man who had only just recently dodged the sword. The leader's face had never been so serious. Although he could feel that Jianchen's strength was nowhere near his own, the speed of Jianchen's sword was far beyond what he could do. He could only dodge the sword narrowly, and with the sword relentlessly pursuing his throat, if he were to make a small mistake, then the possibility that he would lose his life was very high. Without hesitation, the leader brought his giant sword up to block the sword aimed at his throat. The moment he had brought the sword up to his neck, the light wind sword had already brushed against it. Although the light wind sword had failed to pierce into the leader's body, the sword chi that was coiling around the blade had made the leader extremely terrified, secretly thinking to himself, "What a sharp sword chi! What type of method did this kid use to cultivate? Could it be that he used a battle skill?" Just thinking about the term battle skill had inadvertently fired up the man's spirits, and he couldn't help but think to spare Jianchen. He thought that he could wrest away the battle skill from Jianchen, since battle skills were indeed very precious within the Tianyuan continent, and that it helped one's cultivation improve by leaps and bounds. Even though he was one of the highest-ranked member of the Zhou mercenaries in Wake City, he didn't have a battle skill, and neither did the great Saint Masters in the group. As his mind wandered about this topic, a fierce crisis was about to overturn him. Seeing that the silver-white light was rapidly getting bigger within his eyesight, he realized that this next sword stroke was 2 or 3 times faster than the last 2 strikes. In an instant, the silver sword had evaded his own great sword and arrived at his throat. A small ray of light could be seen as the sharp point of the sword flashed from within the glare. The leader was terrified beyond belief. In the moment he had reacted, there was only a foot separating him, and the sword chi enveloped blade, but the sword had traveled this distance within a flash. Even though the leader had the strength of a peak Saint Master, there would be no time for him to dodge it. Just as the light wind sword was about to pierce into the leader's throat, an ear-piercing sound was heard as another sword came in from the side. Abruptly knocking against the light wind sword, it altered the trajectory of it, so that it would go past the leader's neck without harm. The sudden appearance of this sword was caused by the second Saint Master of the Zhou mercenaries. Even after knocking the light wind sword out of the way, that man didn't stop there. He immediately attacked Jianchen fiercely while the leader cried out, "Casa, for you to not pay attention at a time like this, did you want to die, you bastard?" Although that man was yelling at him, the leader wasn't angry at all. Instead, he felt his neck with his own hand as his face grew pale, and his forehead started to drip with sweat. This was because when he felt his neck where his leather armor was, there was a gap revealing where the sword had gone through. If it were not for the intervention of another person, then having a simple cut on his leather armor would have been the least of his worries. At this moment, Jianchen had already struck back at the second Saint Master. This man only had middle Saint Master strength, and was weaker than the leader of the Zhou mercenaries by a small margin. In the few rounds Jianchen had exchanged with the other Saint Master, he was slowly pushing back the other Saint Master. "Casa, why are you just standing there foolishly? Come quickly and help me. This kid's sword is far too fast for me to continue blocking any longer. God damn it, how is his speed this fast?" Looking at the still dazed leader, the mercenary that was fighting Jianchen cursed out loud at him. Fighting Jianchen was like fighting against the storming rain and winds itself, and with each series of sword strokes Jianchen had swung, the more difficult it was getting to defend against. Even his leather armor was starting to have traces of Jianchen's sword running across it despite the extraordinary resilience of the leather. He was afraid that very soon, his body wouldn't have an area without a wound running across it. Hearing his friend curse at him, the leader's eyes narrowed as the saint force within his saint weapon pulsated tremendously. Raising his arm, he immediately dashed forward to slash down on Jianchen. As the sword dropped down, a small amount of sword chi flickered as it flew toward Jianchen. Sparing a sideways glance at Casa, Jianchen swayed slightly to the side and dodged the sword chi-filled blade. The sword continued onwards to smash into a large tree with a resounding boom, allowing everyone to hear and see a large gash being revealed on the trunk. Afterwards, another ear-piercing shriek was heard as the two Saint Masters were already ready to strike once more, their saint weapons filling the air with their saint force. Jianchen's eyes grew cold as he stared unflinchingly at the two incoming blades. The light wind sword began to release an even denser amount of sword chi that seemed to cover the entire sky as the sword made contact with the other two swords. Ding ding ding. The metallic sounds of swords rang out in the forest as in that moment, Jianchen had swung out 18 times with his sword, each one accurately hitting the other blades. Each one of the 18 strikes hit the great swords right on the blade fiercely, causing the blade to shake with a strong vibration with every hit. When the amount of strikes had hit 18, the amount of energy transmitted into the other swords was far too much for the Zhou mercenaries to handle. Immediately, both of the mercenaries' right arms went numb, especially the place between their thumb and forefinger. Feeling the extreme amount of numbness in their arms, the two mercenaries looked at each other in shock. At this moment, the two of them had secretly wanted to flee, although they knew that Jianchen's strength wasn't on par with them. Jianchen was showing off a fighting strength that was frightening the both of them. His strength was hard to defend against, and against his lightning-fast speed, they both had to push their concentration to the extreme, or risk seeing each other at the Yellow River. If they were not careful, then their deaths here would be for certain. "Captain Casa, the cub is already in our possession." The two Saint Masters turned around to hear who had just spoken, only to see an armored mercenary with the struggling cub in his hands. Its claws waved about in midair as it howled unceasingly. While it was a cute sight, it was also quite a pathetic one. Seeing this, the two mercenaries had a joyous smile on their faces, but then at the same time, Jian Chen's light wind sword flashed toward the leader's throat once more. This time, Casa was neither on guard nor able to dodge in time, and the other Saint Master was in no position to save him like last time. The sword chi-enhanced sword slashed through Casa's leather armor and pierced straight into his throat. Casa, the other mercenary, reached out in shock, but at the moment he saw his leader's throat pierced through, his eyes bulged out of his eye sockets as he roared. A large amount of Saint force began to condense within his Saint weapon as he slashed at Jian Chen with it. Jian Chen didn't even bother to spare him a glance as he stamped off the ground. The force propelled him forward like an artillery shell as he rocketed toward the mercenary with the struggling cub. Seeing the peak Saint Master Captain Casa be killed, the mercenary's eyes bulged as he couldn't believe that such a strong expert would be killed so easily. However, the mercenary wasn't that stupid, and immediately threw the cub at the remaining Saint Master that was fighting against Jian Chen. Captain Cross Catch. The cub flew into the air in a wild arc before landing perfectly within the arms of the last remaining Saint Master. Seeing the Class 5 cub within his hand, Captain Cross' previously murderous face suddenly calmed down as he hesitated before saying, "Everyone move out from here." Huh. As Cross spoke, the deep growl of a tiger suddenly came loudly from the depths of the forest. Coming through the pitch darkness, the 20-something people there all froze as they realized what they had just heard. Because great saints weren't a threat to Jian Chen at all, he had quickly dropped down 5 of them. The group of mercenaries that had followed Cross were quickly dropping like flies. Ho! The previously faraway roar of the tiger was getting closer as the Golden Fur Tiger King was approaching at rapid speeds. Jian Chen's face grew even more anxious as he looked at Kendall and said, "The Golden Fur Tiger King is approaching this area quickly. It won't take too long before it gets here. Captain Kendall, it's not good to stay here. Let's leave quickly." Kendall looked at the blood-soaked members of the Flame Mercenaries and the multiple wounds on them. It was a good thing the battle didn't go on for long. Otherwise they would have suffered from casualties. Everyone hurry up and run away. Unable to dress up their bloody wounds, everyone quickly began to dash into the forest with great speed. But because of the various wounds they had, their movements weren't all that fast. Oh! Another roar of the tiger rang out, and this time it was extremely close by. In an instant, everyone could hear the tiger running towards them. The wind pressure it was generating was enough to flatten the tree leaves to the ground. Every single member of the Flame Mercenaries went pale in the face. As Kendall fled for his life, he looked behind him at Jian Chen and threw his space belt at him. "Jian Chen, you have the strongest strength amongst all of us, so your chance of escaping is the highest among us. I entrust my space belt to you. You have to make sure you take this out." Seeing Captain Kendall throw his space belt at him, Jian Chen wanted to refuse it, but then Kendall opened his mouth once more. "Jian Chen, don't refuse it. If by chance we don't make it out of these forests, then I beg of you to take care of our families. If I die here, then their lives would take a turn for the worse. My parents, my wife, and my child, they won't be able to live a good life in the future. So it all depends on you." Kendall pleaded with Jian Chen. Sending a complicated look at Kendall, Jian Chen nodded his head resolutely. Taking in the space belt, Jian Chen stared for a little longer and said, "Uncle Kendall, we'll definitely make it out of here. That Golden Fur Tiger King isn't looking for us." "Aw, save me." A call for help suddenly came from behind. "Kobolds, that was Kobolds. He fell in the swamps, quickly now. Grab onto my hand, Kobolds," a voice called out. It was Xiao Dao who was extremely anxious. Hearing this, everyone stood still as Jian Chen looked behind him at Xiao Dao, only to see him on his belly with his hand outstretched into the swamps. In the swamp, Kobold's figure was already completely submerged. Jian Chen's face changed as he immediately followed what Xiao Dao was doing and plunged his hand into the swamp. However, like Xiao Dao, his hand had felt nothing. "Kobolds!" Xiao Dao closed his eyes in pain and sorrow. "AI!" Jian Chen sighed before hitting Xiao Dao on the shoulder, "Go," and then began to run once more. The other members began to sigh in sorrow as they closed their eyes. After a brief moment of silence, they continued to run deeper into the forest. With every second lost was another second of running that was thrown away. Because it was almost nightfall, the magical beast mountain range was very dark, so the visibility was low. On the path, everyone had tripped more than once, but they each picked themselves up from the ground as quickly as they fell and continued to run. Some decided to run on top of the tree branches in order to avoid the swamps below. After a while, Jianshen's foot suddenly stopped, halting his forward momentum. Jianshen, what are you doing slowing down? Hurry up and run, Kendall said anxiously. Jianshen didn't speak and pointed ahead of them. Kendall looked to where Jianshen's finger was pointing at, only to see the blurry figures of 10 mercenaries up ahead panting with exhaustion. It's the Zhou mercenaries, Jianshen said. Kendall's eyes flashed with a cold glare as he growled. So it is, they're not running. So what are they doing standing there? They can't run. The road ahead of them is blocked off by a Class 4 magical beast. Why is there a Class 4 magical beast here? Come, let's take a detour around. Jianshen jumped to a branch nearby. Ho! Another tiger roar came from behind, this time closer than ever. The roar was so loud, it shook the eardrums of the flame mercenaries, causing them to go deaf for a moment. After the roar, the gigantic figure came bursting in from behind and headed toward the Zhou mercenaries. Soon after the roar, the members of the Zhou mercenaries all fell to the ground, with a single member lifted into the air by the giant jaw of the tiger. Not good. The Golden Fur Tiger King is far too fast. In such a short time it overtook us in speed. Let's go quickly, otherwise there'll be no chance. Seeing the shadowy figure, Jianshen cried out in shock at the appearance of it before immediately jumping without hesitation into the foliage nearby. Ahead, the Zhou mercenaries, who were all alive and well 1 breath ago, had fallen to the claws of the Golden Fur Tiger King. All that was left was the mercenary who was holding the cub cross. The Golden Fur Tiger King was the real deal. Those who were only at the Great Saint level or under would not be able to withstand even a single hit from it. Cross' left hand held the cub as his right hand held a sword that was ready to pierce the cub's neck, causing a stalemate between the Golden Fur Tiger King and him. The Golden Fur Tiger King was 4 meters long, but because of the guise of the night, the entire body of the tiger couldn't be seen clearly. Ho! The Golden Fur Tiger King growled as its eyes became crimson, staring at Cross with a furious glare. It didn't dare to act rashly with the cub in Cross' hands. As a Class 5 magical beast, it had enough knowledge to understand the situation. Get back, hurry up and retreat, otherwise we'll all die here. Cross cried out in terror as he stared at the Golden Fur Tiger King. His entire body was shaking, and his forehead was dripping with sweat. Ayo! Ayo! The cub began to struggle within the hands of Cross. Even it had begun to feel a little afraid. Even though it was a Class 5 magical beast in potential, it was still young, and did not have much power at the moment. The Golden Fur Tiger King didn't give way, but then Cross bit his lip and pressed down with his sword, causing a few strands of golden fur to be cut away from the cub. Ho! The Golden Fur Tiger King hastily growled, before slowly retreating backward a few steps. However, the crimson glare in its eyes had intensified. Behind Cross was yet another Class 4 tiger that stared him down like one would look at their prey. Chapter 122. The death of Kendall. Seeing the Golden Fur Tiger King retreat, Cross let loose a sigh of relief. At this moment, his heart was pounding, and if anyone were to stand behind him, they would be able to clearly hear it. In this moment of desperation, Cross was nearly at the end of the road of life. However, he was rejoicing now because he had succeeded. Yet at the same time, it was far too early to rejoice, since while the Golden Fur Tiger King was temporarily held back due to the cub, the Class 4 tiger behind was not. There was no way for Cross to make the Class 4 tiger retreat, but he had to make sure he didn't do anything hasty. Otherwise it would lead to an unwanted ending. Right now the Golden Fur Tiger King's eyes were crimson with fury, and the experienced Cross knew that the tiger was in a stage of extreme rage. It was only because of the fact that he had the cub that it was not acting out on impulse. That cub was Cross' protective charm, and if he were to lose control of it, Cross knew that what would come next would be the end of his life. Under the threat of death, Cross was strangely calm as he thought about what to do next. Despite being in a situation where death was all but guaranteed, he still did not give up his desire to live. As long as there was an opportunity, he wouldn't let it go. Although, with everything said, it was an extremely weak strand of an opportunity to live, and there he wasn't certain if he would be able to escape. Then, Cross' eyes landed on the nearby flame mercenaries. His heart thumped for a second before he immediately tossed the cub over to where they stood. Ho! Just as Cross made a move, the glaring golden fur tiger king exploded into action, immediately bursting over to where Cross stood. It swung both of its paws onto Cross' shoulders, inflicting deep wounds on his shoulders. The tiger released a sky-shattering roar, making Cross unable to breathe. Because of the golden fur tiger king's action, Cross immediately paled as he started to mentally blank out. He had thrown the cub over to the flame mercenaries because he had thought that the golden fur tiger king would change targets, but he hadn't thought that the tiger would move that fast. The moment he had thrown the cub, the tiger had appeared right in front of him. At that moment, Cross knew that his life was over. Ayo! Ayo! The cub began to cry out in fear after being thrown by Cross. The sense of weightlessness had terrified the cub, causing it to cry out even more than before. Seeing the cub rise into the air, and then arc downward, the crimson eyes of the tiger grew alarmed as it began to panic. With a single roar, it leapt away from its position over Cross's body and chased after the Madare cub. Feeling the heaviness in his shoulders being lifted, Cross was momentarily stunned. Seeing how the golden fur tiger king had chased after the cub, he immediately awoke to his senses and had an ecstatic smile on his face. Despite the deep burning sensation he was feeling from his shoulders, his arms and legs fiercely pushed against the ground, and he stood up. Limping into the forest, he then disappeared from sight. Seeing Cross flee into the bushes, the Class 4 tiger that had been blocking the route uneasily stamped both of its paws on the ground and desperately wanted to chase after him. However, after seeing the explosion of anger from the golden fur tiger king, it suppressed its impulse. Although they initially possessed some intelligence, Class 4 magical beasts were still too stupid. Their abilities to think through problems couldn't possibly compare to a mature human adult's. The golden fur tiger king had only told it to block the group of people in its path, but it didn't tell the tiger to chase after anyone that tried to flee. Before any further commands came from the golden fur tiger king, this muscle-brained Class 4 tiger could only stare helplessly as Cross escaped. Even if it wanted to chase after it, it didn't dare to. Just as Captain Kendall was about to disappear into the foliage, a black blur flew over and struck him in the chest before falling to the ground. In response, Captain Kendall instinctively reached out his hand to pick up what had hit him. The moment his hand brushed against the black object, he understood just what exactly it was, and grew pale in the face. Crap, this is the cub of the golden fur tiger king. By this point in time, the cub of the golden fur tiger king was no longer a valuable asset, but instead, a burning hot piece of iron. Whoever touched it would be burned. Just as Kendall had decided to throw the cub back, a terrifying roar was heard as a black figure instantly flew at him. The large, stinky mouth of the tiger then immediately bit down on Kendall's chest. There was simply no time for Kendall to react. The entire top half of his body was in the jaws of the golden fur tiger king, and its extremely sharp fangs sank deep within Kendall's body. Blood began to spurt out of his wounds like a fountain, covering the entire top part of his body with a bloody red color. Ah! Kendall screamed in pain and desolation. The moment Kendall had been bitten by the tiger, his voice had already sounded weaker. Captain Kendall! Uncle Kendall! Seeing the top part of Kendall's body being bitten by the tiger, every single member of the flame mercenaries glared in hatred at the tiger as they cried out in heart-piercing tones. The heart-wrenching screams of all the flame mercenaries reached the ears of Jian Chun, who immediately withdrew from the foliage with a fearful face. Seeing Kendall pale with fright and blood loss from having the entire top part of his body bitten, Jian Chun let out a shout of alarm. The light wind sword instantly materialized in his right hand and exploded with a powerful, silver glow as sword chi coiled around the blade. Whoosh! The sword separated from Jian Chen's palm, almost as if it had turned into an intelligent immortal sword, and flew toward the golden fur tiger king's head. The moment the sword brimming with sword qi hit the head of the tiger, it only penetrated a small layer of fur, practically doing no heavy amount of damage to it. Although Jian Chen's soul sword was stronger than his regular attacks by tenfold, the golden fur tiger king was a class 5 magical beast. Since Jian Chen was no more than a middle great saint, inflicting a serious injury was an inconceivable event. How? Feeling a small tinge of pain on his head, the tiger's eyes turned crimson as they looked at Jian Chen. With a mighty force, it tore Kendall's body in two. The top part of Kendall's body was immediately swallowed by the golden fur tiger king, as the lower half of his body immediately fell to the floor. Blood began to spill everywhere. Uncle Kendall, seeing the lower half of Kendall's body fall to the ground, everyone in the group let out a horrified yell as their eyes teared up in anguish. Ho! The tiger snarled as it leapt toward where Jian Chen was. Using the profound steps, Jian Chen flew like a speed demon a few distances away in order to dodge the attack of the tiger. At the same time, the spinning light wind sword transformed into a silver streak of light that reorientated itself in midair and shot toward the tiger's head once more. However, just as the light wind sword was about to pierce into the tiger's head, the golden fur tiger king's tail disappeared in a blur and slapped against the light wind sword with a firm blow. Clang! The seemingly soft tail of the tiger was surprisingly strong as the light wind sword collided with the tail, creating a crisp sound. The sword was sent flying a few meters away as the incredibly strong sword qi around it disappeared, and the sword returned to its normal appearance once more. Jian Chen's figure shook slightly as his face began to pale. Slowly, a trickle of blood began to leak out from his mouth because of what happened to his saint weapon. His light wind sword symbolized his cultivation, and after using his spirit to control it, no matter how much damage was done to it in this state, Jian Chen would feel the direct consequence. While the tail of the tiger hadn't hit Jian Chen directly, the damage done to the light wind sword was clearly beyond what it could take, making Jian Chen take on the additional damage. The golden fur tiger king disappeared along with its shadow, as it flew toward Jian Chen at a speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. Both of its claws immediately swung down with devastating power toward Jian Chen's chest. Jian Chen attempted to dodge, but was unfortunately slower than the golden fur tiger king. Because of his wounds from earlier, he was not able to completely evade the tiger's attack. The claws of the tiger carried a cold wind as they struck into Jian Chen's chest. At the same time, his chest became mutilated, and parts of his chest bones could be seen. With a great groan of pain, Jian Chen grew as pale as paper as he felt the fierce pain. Against a Class 5 magical beast, Jian Chen had no way to protect himself, and even the soul sword he was so proud of wasn't enough to leave even the smallest of wounds on the golden fur tiger king. Jian Chen, hurry up and escape. I'll stall for you. Xiao Dao cried out suddenly as he pulled out his small dagger and raised it to stab at the tiger's body. Chapter 123. The Destruction of the Flame Mercenaries. Jian Chen, hurry up and escape. I'll stall it for you. Xiao Dao cried out suddenly as he pulled out his small dagger and raised it to stab the body of the tiger. However, the Class 5 Golden Fur Tiger King was far too strong for Xiao Dao to inflict any injuries at all with his saint strength. Even when the dagger stabbed into the body of the tiger, not a single trace could be seen. The tail of the tiger disappeared once more as it flew at Xiao Dao. Pa! A loud sound rang out as the tail of the Golden Fur Tiger King smashed against Xiao Dao's chest. The clothes around his chest blew apart as he sported a huge indentation on it. The unbelievably strong tail had completely smashed through his chest bones, as well as broken apart the inner organs of his body. Blood mixed in with pieces of his inner organ were belched out of Xiao Dao's mouth as he flew 10 meters in the air before smashing against a tree. Xiao Dao. Seeing Xiao Dao in such a miserable state, Jian Chen's face paled as he cried out in shock. However, just as he was about to go over and examine the extent of Xiao Dao's wounds, the tiger immediately appeared next to him and ruthlessly bit at him. The jaws of the tiger carried an exceptionally bloody odor, making breathing very hard for Jianchen. In a split second, Jianchen forced himself to the right in an attempt to dodge, unable to bear with the pain in his chest. Rolling onto the ground, he moved away from the golden fur tiger king. Against a class 5 magical beast like the tiger, Jianchen couldn't retaliate at all. With the soul sword, he was so proud of not even being a threat to the golden fur tiger king. It went to show how big of a difference there was between the two schools. You guys hurry up and run. I'll stall it for you guys. Jianchen yelled at the flame mercenaries behind him. Hearing Jianchen, everyone looked at each other in a daze, but other than that, they didn't move. There was still quite the distance until they would be able to escape from the magical beast mountain range. But with their speed, how would they be able to outrun a class 5 magical beast? That won't do, Jianchen. Out of all of us here, only you have the chance to get away. I'll stall the golden fur tiger, and you hurry up and run. Just remember to take revenge for us. Hoopa cried out with his saint weapon in his hand, as a way to show his defiant nature against his imminent death. None of us are capable of shaking off a class 5 magical beast, so there is no hope for us. Everyone come and block the golden fur tiger king. Protect Jianchen as he leaves. Seeing the heroic Hoopa dash toward the tiger, everyone had a look of despair in their eyes. Hoopa is right. No matter what we do, we will die today. In that case, then why not sacrifice our lives in one spectacular finale and protect Jianchen? Everyone forward. Block off the tiger. Chang Mingfeng roared as he brought his giant sword up and chased after Hoopa. Jianchen, remember to avenge us. The heroic actions of both Hoopa and Chang Mingfeng seemed to have infected the rest of the mercenaries. One after another they carried a grim determination on their faces that seemed to defy death itself, and then chased after the golden fur tiger king. Seeing every single member charge in at the tiger defiantly, Jianchen was momentarily stunned. Immediately snapping to his senses afterward, he roared, "Out of the question! Everyone run away! I'm still able to temporarily stall it a little longer." Jianchen immediately connected with the light wind sword, causing a large amount of sword chi to once more levitate the sword. However, just one look at the sword, everyone could tell that the amount of sword chi was weaker than before. Although everyone had seen the strange thing that was Jianchen's sword, it was far too late to actually care about it at that point. Jianchen, hurry up and go, don't let us sacrifice ourselves in vain. Chang Mingfeng called out once more. The tiger's crimson eyes looked at the humans that were charging at it with disdain. However, it did not move a paw to do anything. Hoopa was the first to reach the body of the tiger. With an explosive yell, the saint force within his body entered his battle axe and immediately smashed itself against the tiger's body. However, as strong as Hoopa's blow on the golden fur tiger king's body, it had only managed to cut away a few strands of the fur. With him only being a great saint, there was a very low chance of being able to do a lot of damage to the class 5 magical beast. Soon after, the rest of the flame mercenaries attacked the tiger's body with their own saint weapons, but to no avail. Aside from Hoopa, who had succeeded in cutting away a few strands of fur, no one else had been able to do any damage, but the tiger hadn't moved at all either. Everyone's faces were already the color of ash. They had long since known that the strength of a class 5 magical beast was tremendous, but it was only at that moment that they truly understood the extent of its strength. The defense of the golden fur tiger king wasn't all that strong. It was just the fact that the flame mercenaries were too powerless to do anything major. Ho! The golden fur tiger king thundered as it swept its claw forward, catching the weakest member there, Yun Xian, in the chest. His heart was immediately ripped into many pieces, before the tiger disappeared once more before arriving at where Zhou Dekai stood. Pa! Another crisp sound rang through the area, as Zhou Dekai's body was sent flying far into the air by the tiger's tail. Like Xiao Dao, his chest had completely caved in as his inner organs were smashed as well. Brother! Zhou Xiaokai cried out in grief before turning back to the tiger in anger. With a snarl, he lifted his giant broadsword up in an attempt to cut into the beast. However, to the tiger, Zhou Xiaokai's attack was like a scratch to relieve an itch, and would not harm it at all. Against the Flame Mercenaries, the Golden Fur Tiger King was only using the most basics of attacks and bites. Despite that, the Flame Mercenaries had no ability to fight back at all, and in such a short moment, 3 people had already succumbed to the tiger, leaving only 5 people left to fight. Jianshen, hurry up and go. Don't squander our valiant sacrifice. Chang Mingfeng roared at Jianshen, who was still standing there. Jianshen, what are you doing just standing there? Hurry up and go. Remember, when you are stronger in the future, come back to the forest and kill this Golden Fur Tiger King, and take its monster core. Hupu yelled before the maw of the tiger descended onto the top part of his body. With a heavy clamp, Hupo's sturdy body was split into 2 pieces, as the tiger swallowed the top part. Seeing the death of Hupu, Jianshen's body shook in grief, as he looked at the remaining few members of the Flame Mercenaries. Biting his lips in frustration, he controlled his light wind sword back to his hand, and immediately disappeared into the forest. His heart knew that even if he were to stay behind, it would change nothing. He would die along with the others, since a Class 5 magical beast was not something he could take on. However, each one of the Flame Mercenaries were throwing away their lives in order to hinder the Golden Fur Tiger King, just so Jianshen could gain some time to escape. This was something that hurt Jianshen far more than what the tiger had done to him. Entering the forest, Jianshen forced himself to ignore the screams behind him, as he forged onward with all of the speed he could muster. The grasses within the forest were many, and the shortest of grasses reached up to half his height. While the pain in Jianshen's chest was unbearable, he was using the trees to boost himself forward as he flew at top speeds. Not only was this faster than walking on the ground, but he could avoid the swamplands below. No longer than 10 breaths after Jianshen had escaped into the forest, the loud roar of a tiger could be heard. It had appeared that the tiger was getting closer to Jianshen. Jianshen's face grew unsightly, knowing that the Golden Fur Tiger King must have already disposed of the Flame Mercenaries, and was resiliently pursuing after Jianshen. The Golden Fur Tiger King was extremely fast. Even before Jianshen could finish his thoughts, he could already faintly hear the tiger run through the forests, bringing a strong gale that flattened the nearby grass. Jianshen's face grew solemn as he thought. Against a Class 5 magical beast, other than running away, there was no other way to win. And right now, with the frightening speed of the Golden Fur Tiger King, even if he wanted to flee, he didn't have the power to. After all, speed was the specialty of a tiger type of magical beast, and even more so for a Class 5 magical beast. His Saint Force coiled around his body even faster, increasing Jianshen's speed by triple the amount. Right now, he was going all out. He was going the fastest speed he could muster. At the same time, he was desperately trying to think of a countermeasure. But even after a long time, Jianshen couldn't think of any way. Unless he were to come across someone who was at least at the Earth Saint Master level, or another beast that could compete against the Golden Fur Tiger King, he would have no chance to escape. With the speed of the Golden Fur Tiger King, it wouldn't be long before it would overtake him. However, the chances of meeting a Earth Saint Master, or another magical beast on the same level as the Golden Fur Tiger King outside of the Magical Beast Mountain range, were slim to none. Another roar of the Golden Fur Tiger King came from behind. This time, when Jianshen took a look behind him, he could see the large body of the tiger come within 20 meters of him. Jianshen's face grew even more unsightly. Death he did not fear. He had already died once, so dying again was not all that bad. Although, in this world, he still had people he was worried about, and so he did not want to die in a way like this just yet. Suddenly, the tiger transformed into a blur as it leapt towards Jianshen. Chapter 124. Strong Sword Chi. Jianshen was still in midair, without the ability to move in any other direction. With the Golden Fur Tiger King being so fast, there was no way for Jianshen to dodge. In a moment of desperation, Jianshen turned around abruptly with both of his hands outwards, lashing out against the head of the tiger. He borrowed the backwards force to push himself forward even faster, escaping from the bloody jaws of the tiger. His legs staggered a bit as he landed on the ground. Before Jianshen could even collect himself, a large force rammed into Jian Chen's chest. Not being able to even see what happened, Jian Chen flew backwards like a bullet as he was launched into the air once more. The clothes he had been wearing had already been ripped apart as his chest became one big indentation, making it seem as if his front was practically his back. Immediately, another strong amount of force circulated through his body, smashing against his inner organs in an instant. Jian Chen flew 30 meters forward before finally smashing against a tree trunk and falling to the ground. His head knocked against a tree branch firmly as he fell to the ground unconscious. The Golden Fur Tiger King had no intentions of letting Jian Chen go. Stamping toward Jian Chen, it opened its jaws wide in preparation to eat him. Just as the tiger was on the verge of biting Jian Chen, wildly flickering, weak glows of azure and violet rose from Jian Chen. Although the glows were quite faint, they were extremely eye-catching at this time of night. As the twin glows appeared, they illuminated the entire forest and suddenly, a strong amount of sword qi enshrouded the area. But just as fast as it came, the sword qi quickly disappeared. Ayo! At the same time, a desolate scream emerged from the mouth of the Golden Fur Tiger King, as a rarely seen trace of fear appeared in its eyes. It was like the tiger had just been shocked, and it quickly retreated 10 meters back. Its bewildered tiger eyes stared at the unconscious Jian Chen. The previously crimson eyes became clear once more as its body began to tremble and shake. Suddenly, blood began to spill out from the body of the Golden Fur Tiger King in a continuous flow. Its previously entirely golden fur was now stained a bloody red, its body covered with countless wounds. While the wounds were minute in size, they were deep and intersected with one another in countless ways. Even the tiger's head was not spared. The sight of it was rather pitiful. The Golden Fur Tiger King at that moment didn't retain any of its majestic aura. Instead, it looked like it had just come out of a desperate battle with countless deep wounds. The giant body of the tiger shook slightly as its eyes stared fearfully at the still unconscious Jian Chen. At that moment, with Jian Chen at the center, all of the grass and trees within 100 meters had been cut into countless pieces that floated in the air, filling the sky with a powder that literally covered the sight of the sky from the earth within an 100 meters circumference. The sky was so densely covered that one's line of sight within would have been completely blocked off if one tried to look around. The body of the tiger shivered more violently as it looked around itself in disbelief and shock. A Class 5 magical beast had a large amount of knowledge, and although it couldn't communicate like humans, it was still able to think. Its intelligence was equal to a human's, but at this moment, the Golden Fur Tiger King was feeling a tremendous amount of shock. While a Class 5 magical beast could easily decimate anything within a 100-meter circumference, to be able to do it in an instant, while reducing everything to a fine powder, was something even a Class 6 magical beast would be unable to do. It was the strong amount of sword qi from before that had made the heart of the tiger tremble with fear. In a split second, the sword qi had caused countless deep wounds on the tiger's body, making it fear for its life. A short moment later, the fine powder in the air fell to the ground, stacking up to become a layer of dust. Within the 100-meter circumference, there wasn't a single trace of any living organism but Jian Chen. Aside from the dust, there was nothing else in sight. Even the large tree that Jian Chen was slumped against had disappeared. The beady eyes of the tiger looked around itself and let loose a terrified roar before running away with its tail tucked between its legs. Its speed was even faster than when it was chasing Jian Chen. The area became absolutely silent after the tiger had left the area, leaving Jian Chen alone on the ground in an unconscious state. A fine layer of dust now covered his body. The time quietly went by as the night sky silently retreated. The bright sun slowly rose into the air, emitting a bright ray of sunlight that warmed the earth. Shining down onto the area where no plant life existed, the sunny ground was almost like a carpet for the sleeping Jian Chen. Perhaps because the lingering traces of a Class 5 magical beast could be felt, no other magical beast had approached the area that night. Even the most common of wild animals hadn't dared to come near, and so it wasn't clear if they simply hadn't been in the area, or if they hadn't dared to approach. Suddenly, Within the circle where no plant life existed, a pile of dust began to shake and tremble. The pile of dust fiercely shook and slid off, as it gradually revealed a person underneath. The figure that was hidden by the layer of dust the entire night was Jianshen. Brushing away the mysterious powder on him, Jianshen slowly opened his eyes only to be greeted by the azure sky overhead. Just as Jianshen wanted to lift his head, his mind was suddenly jump-started, reminding him of the state he was in. Immediately feeling the intense pain racking through his body, Jianshen couldn't help but yell out. Weakly lying on the ground, Jianshen sucked in a few deep breaths. With his spirit, Jianshen was already aware of what type of condition his body was in, even without actually engaging in an inner body inspection. Each of his internal organs had suffered from serious injuries that were lighter than when he had been right outside Wake City. However, to other people, injuries like this would have been fatal. His chest was already a mutilated mess to the point where even his chest bones could be seen after being smashed apart by the Golden Fur Tiger King. Just then, Jianshen thought about the attack he had suffered from the claws of the Golden Fur Tiger King before falling unconscious, and his head quivered in memory for a second. But when he took a look around, only emptiness greeted him. The perimeter around him was a zone of nothingness, without even a single plant. There was only a fine layer of dust covering the floor, and there weren't any traces of the Golden Fur Tiger King. Chapter 125. Hey, listen! Seeing the area around him, Jianshen was in shock as he continued to look around vacantly. Strange, where is this? Where is the Golden Fur Tiger King? Was I saved by someone? Jianshen was lying on the ground as he slowly looked around. His heart had quickly calmed down, but his mind was already thinking back to when the flame mercenaries had tried to protect him while he ran. They had sacrificed their lives to stall the Golden Fur Tiger King. As that thought ran through his mind, Jianshen's heart began to hurt once more. Even though he had not even known the flame mercenaries for over a month, they had shared a joyous friendship. Although the friendship was not very deep, in their final moments, each one of the flame mercenary members had still laid down their lives to act as and hold the tiger back, and give Jianshen more time to escape. Even though the major reason was because they knew they wouldn't be able to run away from a Class 5 magical beast anyways, this was still a very heavy emotional blow to Jianshen. Uncle Kendall dear kobolds Changming Feng, Hu Pe Zhou De Kai, Zhou Xiao Kai, Xiao Dao and Yun Xian, don't worry. When I have enough strength, I will definitely come and take revenge for you all. I will personally kill and behead the Golden Fur Tiger King myself. Jianshen swore as an intense amount of killing intent radiated from him. Breathing out deeply, Jianshen forced himself to calm down as he surveyed his surroundings once more. Jianshen had his doubts about whether or not the Golden Fur Tiger King had run away, since this place seemed too extremely different from the place he had been in before he had fallen unconscious. What place is this? Exactly who saved me? Jianshen doubtfully wondered as he continued to examine his surroundings. Forget it, now isn't the time to think about this. Healing my injuries is my utmost priority right now. Shaking himself away from the distracting thoughts, he began to use the Light Saint Force from the World Essence to heal himself. The bizarre energy from the World Essence quickly began to gather around Jianshen, and after a certain amount had gathered, the energy enwrapping Jianshen's body turned a milky white color. The Light Saint Force continuously entered Jianshen's body and filled his wounds, causing them to slowly heal over time. After 4 hours, Jianshen's spirit had finally run out, and he had no other choice but to stop. Although his wounds weren't fully healed, they would no longer impede any basic motor functions. Dispersing the remaining Light Saint Force, Jianshen slowly crawled up from the ground. Taking off his ruined clothing, he brought out a new pair of clothes from within his space belt. It was only then that Jianshen was fully aware of just how much powder was around him. Slowly bending down to the ground, he scooped up a handful of powder. Not only did it feel cold, but there was a moist feeling to it, and when he smelled it there was a small hint of plant life. His right hand kneaded the powder between his fingers, as an astonished expression formed in his eyes. Could this be the powdered dust of a plant? he said to himself while looking at the 100-meter circumference of emptiness around himself. While there was powder everywhere inside the circle, there was only tall grass outside. Seeing this scene, Jianshen's body lightly shuddered. He couldn't believe the thought that had just run through his mind. Could all of the grass in this area have been reduced to dust? At this thought, Jianshen couldn't help but feel surprised. He didn't know what had happened while he was unconscious, but he knew that reducing every single piece plant life into fine powder within this area was an extremely difficult task to do. Controlling this powerful energy alone wouldn't have been an easy task. Really, what happened here? Jianshen wondered with a large amount of doubt and curiosity. Not wishing to stay there any longer, Jianshen used the sun as his compass and began to move off in the direction leading out of the forest. Jianshen did not want to hurt his mind thinking about whatever had happened while he was unconscious. In general, he only felt fortuitous that he had survived the ordeal. Jianshen's injuries weren't completely healed, so he was very cautious as he traveled. In order to avoid any magical beast, he was going quite slowly. After traveling for 2 days, he finally made it out of the magical beast mountain range. In addition, all the wounds on his body were fully healed. Jianshen walked aimlessly through the dense forests with a serious expression. The flame mercenaries had entered with 10 people when they had first entered, but only 1 person remained when exiting. Aside from Jianshen, the other 9 mercenaries would forever stay within the magical beast mountain range, whether they had skeletons or not. At that moment, a group of 7 mercenaries walked within distance of Jianshen. Based on their direction, they were heading into the magical beast mountain range. Within the group was a single 20-year-old youth, who looked extremely arrogant. Around him were 6 40-year-old males who, judging by their appearances, were protecting the youth in the middle. The 7 of them clearly saw Jianshen, but they didn't pay him any mind. As the 7 mercenaries brushed past Jianshen, one of them suddenly spoke out arrogantly. "Kid, stop right there." It was the youth that didn't seem much older than Jianshen. Jianshen seemingly didn't hear the voice, and he continued to walk down the road with a heavy expression. Seeing that Jianshen was ignoring him, the youth couldn't help but get angry. He coldly glared at the retreating figure of Jianshen and shouted once more, "The kid over there wearing a sack for clothes, are your ears working? Did you not hear my words?" The youth's anger was rampant, and his expression was brimming with arrogance. Jianshen's figure paused as he lifted his head to look at the youth and spoke calmly. "Are you talking to me? No shit. If I wasn't talking to you, who else would I be talking to? There's no one else here." The youth rudely retorted. He didn't realize how contradictory his words were. Weren't he and the 6 mercenaries with him also people? Hearing the words of the youth, the other 6 mercenaries' muscles all twitched. They had wanted to laugh, but none of them dared to. Jianshen raised an eyebrow and spoke in a low voice. "If you have anything to say, hurry up and say it." Having just experienced the unfortunate accident regarding the flame mercenaries, Jianshen wasn't in a good mood, and even his speaking pattern had changed quite a bit. The youth's eyes flashed with indignation. Seeing Jianshen speak to him so impolitely made him extremely angry. "Kid, let me ask you, did you or did you not come from the magical beast mountain range?" The pitch in the youth's voice had already gone up a few notches, as he stared at Jianshen in an unfriendly way. Jianshen's eyes flashed coldly as he growled, "So what if I did?" The youth revealed a wicked smile. "That's perfect. I need to go there to cultivate, so you will lead the way for your lord. And if I'm happy with you, you'll earn a reward." Chapter 126. Tianxiong clan. Hearing this, Jianshen's already poor mood grew nastier, as a violent mood instantly arose from within his heart. His previously disorderly and expressionless eyes grew cold as he stared angrily at the youth. His eyes seemed to be able to shoot sharp swords as he growled, "Scram! What qualifications do you have to order me to guide you anywhere?" Jianshen's tone carried a strong, murderous aura. The moment Jianshen finished speaking, the other 6 mercenaries all gasped as their gazes uniformly locked onto Jianshen. Having been the target of Jianshen's powerful and piercing glare, the youth's heart couldn't help but tremble with a wave of cowardliness, and he took a step backwards. Soon afterwards, though, the youth realized he had momentarily lost self-control, and anger washed over his cowering heart. As a noble figure, having a no-named mercenary barely older than him intimidate him in such a way was a humiliation that would never be washed away. Glaring angrily at Jian Shen, the youth stepped forward and pointed at Jian Shen, yelling, "Smelly brat, what did you say to me? Why don't you try saying it one more time?" Jian Shen's frosty glare swept over to the 6 mercenaries surrounding the youth. At a single glance, it was obvious what their strength levels were. One of them was a peak Saint Master, 2 were low Saint Masters, and the other 3 were peak Great Saints. Compared to the Flame Mercenaries, the difference in strength was huge. "Take a hike," Jian Shen growled harshly, even though he had already figured out from the amount of bodyguards around the youth that he was the son of an influential family. Jian Shen was by himself at the moment, and he wasn't afraid of any type of power. To him, this youth was only another inconvenience. Although he wasn't very comfortable with this annoyance, there was no way Jian Shen was about to apologize to this person. The youth looked at Jian Shen with a dark expression as he commanded the 6 mercenaries, "Capture him for me." "Yes, young master," one man answered as he moved toward Jian Shen like an arrow with his arms outstretched. This mercenary had a peak Great Saint level of strength after 30 years of cultivation. To that mercenary, Jian Shen was only a youngster whose strength couldn't be that great. If Jian Shen were a peak saint, he'd already be labeled as a genius. But with the mercenary being a peak Great Saint, catching Jian Shen wouldn't be any trouble at all. Jian Shen's eyes flashed coldly as he effortlessly dodged the other mercenary's hand. "You aren't strong enough to touch me." Normally, Jian Shen wouldn't speak with such disdain and harshness, but Jian Shen had been severely affected by the bitter end of the Flame Mercenaries. Thus, he was no longer feeling as well-mannered as before. This youth's arrogant attitude made Jian Shen's already bad mood reach an exploding point. Deep in his heart, there was already a strong urge to kill. Hearing these humiliating words from Jian Shen, this middle-aged man's face became unsightly. With his peak Great Saint strength, he would undoubtedly beat this 20-year-old kid easily. After being ruthlessly humiliated by this kid, he had lost face in front of all of his companions, as well as the rich kid who could affect his future prospects. If he didn't teach this brat a good lesson, he wouldn't dare to ever lift his head among his peers again. The man decided to not hold back any longer. He materialized his sword in his hand and fed his inner saint force to it, causing it to shine brightly. "Arrogant child, why don't you find out for yourself if I'm qualified or not to go up against you?" The man bellowed as he swung his sword at Jian Shen's shoulder with a cold snort. Jian Shen instantly materialized his light wind sword and stabbed it forward. A shining, silver ray of light followed the blade as it moved. Pshh! Before the middle-aged man's sword could reach Jian Shen, the light wind sword had already stabbed into the man's throat. The man's entire body suddenly went rigid as his eyes slowly looked at the area where Jian Shen had stabbed him with the slender sword. With one final look of disbelief, the man's eyes slowly lost their luster and clouded over as he toppled down to the ground with a grieved face. Seeing their middle-aged companion be killed by Jian Shen, the other 5 mercenaries protecting the youth were amazed. Their eyebrows raised upward momentarily before they materialized their saint weapons, seemingly watching Jian Shen warily as a great threat. The youth couldn't believe his eyes as he looked at the fallen man next to Jian Shen. Pointing his finger, he tried to show his strength even though he was inwardly frightened by saying, "Why will you dare kill my guard? Don't you know who I am? Are you tired of living?" Although the youth and Jian Shen weren't all that different in age, the youth had grown up sheltered, and so he didn't have any experiences, nor had he lived through any hardships. So the moment he saw blood being spilled on the ground, his cowardice immediately showed itself. Although he had used his clan's power to bully many people, those people were weaklings that didn't dare to rebel against him. Thus, his life had always progressed smoothly, and he had always looked down on others. However, he had never seen a person like Jian Shen, who was so blunt and killed people as if it was an everyday occurrence. The youth that had never seen such a scene was absolutely intimidated by Jian Shen's methods. Suddenly another sturdy mercenary walked forward and politely gestured at him. "Dear Junior, we are members of the Tianxiong clan. And this is the young master. The matters that just happened were our fault, so I would like to apologize to you here. I hope that you can just look past this issue." This mercenary that spoke was neither servile nor overbearing. Jian Chen's icy cold eyes stared at the group in front of him, as his entire body radiated killing intent. Walking closer to them, he frigidly said, "Then come. If you guys can escape from my hand today, you will naturally be spared." Chapter 127. Show no quarter. Jian Chen's icy cold eyes stared at the group in front of him, as he radiated killing intent all over. Stepping closer to them, he spoke out, "Then fight. Whoever can escape from my hand today will be spared." The 5 mercenaries' faces all hardened as the previous one that spoke continued to say, "Dear friend, you really don't know what's good for oneself. If it were not for the fact that our goal is to help escort the young master to the magical beast mountain range to cultivate, and that the clan leader told us not to make trouble on the way, then this would have been a difficult matter to resolve. Not only that, but do you really think that you can kill all of us? Our Tianxiong clan may not be the strongest, but we aren't an easy target to bully either." What the middle-aged mercenary had said made the youth believe in the strength of his clan, and strengthened his confidence. "That's right, our Tianxiong clan isn't that easy to bully. Within Wake City, there are no other clans that aren't afraid of our Tianxiong clan. Kid, you've already killed one of my guardsmen. Come back with me to accept your punishment, or be prepared to leave your life here." Hearing the youth beside him, the middle-aged man couldn't help but scowl as if to say to himself, "Idiot." While the Tianxiong clan was strong within Wake City, that was the only place. Even within Wake City, the Tianxiong clan was in a dangerous position. Despite Wake City being a third-class city, the amount of clans that lived within it totaled around 20 in number. The Tianxiong clan looked to be an independent clan, but it was actually a deception. The middle-aged man knew clearly that while the Tianxiong clan looked to be impressive beyond belief, they were already a thorn to the side of every other clan. After all, a tall tree received the most wind, and many of the clans that were no weaker than the Tianxiong clan were watching them attentively. The moment an opportunity arose, they would strike without hesitation and divide the Tianxiong clan's territory amongst themselves. The Tianxiong clan had secretly amassed around a third of the city's power, and at such a juicy piece of meat like this, all the other clans were very envious. Also, because of the close proximity with the magical beast mountain range, the amount of people that flowed into the city was enormous. About 99% of people that frequently came into the city were mercenaries with all sorts of powers and influence. It could even be said that the city was filled with dragons and fishes. While it looked like the Tianxiong clan had many special connections, and just as many permanently stationed mercenaries within their pockets, there were just as many clans and people they could not afford to offend or else risk being destroyed. Seeing how Jian Chen had easily killed a peak great saint with such a fast sword stroke, the middle-aged mercenary was extremely surprised. With a sword stroke that fast, even he would need to use his entire strength to be able to dodge it. Thanks to this man's experience, these 2 factors were all he needed in order to establish that Jian Chen probably had a strong background. There was most likely an extremely strong master supporting Jian Chen, otherwise, how could such a young person be so strong? So for that reason, the middle-aged man had tried to resolve the issue in order for the Tianxiong clan to have one less issue. Just as Jian Chen heard the Tianxiong clan's young master say these things, his eyes flashed. Without saying a single word, his body began to move, and he quickly charged at the youth. The light wind sword in his hand became a silver glow that pierced outward like lightning, with its target being the youth's throat. Although Jian Chen understood that this youth was Tianxiong clan's major boss, never in his life had he been afraid of any power or influence. Seeing Jian Chen unexpectedly act with such resolution, the middle-aged man's expression suddenly changed. With a fierce look in his eyes, a large sword materialized in his hand. The man tightly gripped the sword hilt and waved it sharply. The long sword shrieked as it sliced through the air and was thrust toward Jian Chen's light wind sword. Although the middle-aged man had guessed that there was a high possibility that Jian Chen had some type of major background behind him, he was also not one to be afraid of such things. The trajectory for Jian Chen's sword suddenly changed. He lifted the blade and took the initiative to meet the middle-aged man's approaching blade. Ding! The sound of steel meeting steel rang out as Jian Chen's light wind sword and the middle-aged man's large two-handed sword collided in midair. When the two sides came into contact, a powerful energy rippled through middle-aged man's sword directly into Jian Chen's light wind sword. Jian Chen's expression grew solemn. His right arm nimbly controlled the light wind sword to shake off the powerful energy that the man's sword had released. At the same time, he pressed his feet into the ground and instantly appeared behind the man. Displaying all of the advantages his fast sword had, he began to openly attack the man with a typhoon of concentrated attacks. Jian Chen's strength pretty much grew every day. The current him was no longer at a disadvantage when facing the middle-aged man, who was at peak Saint Master level head-on. Of course, the most important reason for that was because the middle-aged man wasn't really a power-type warrior. He was only a bit stronger than Jian Chen in terms of Saint force. As the two faced off, the other four bodyguards also began to quickly fall back, with Tianxiong clan's leader wrapped tightly in protection within their circle. Within a short breath's time, the middle-aged man and Jian Chen had already exchanged dozens of blows. The more he attacked, the more fearful the middle-aged man became. Jian Chen's sword was really too fast. Not only was every attack from the sword incomparably fast, but each one was also fatal. It looked as if the swordplay was messy, but it seemed to contain some kind of profound mystery that the middle-aged man couldn't comprehend. Each stroke within Jian Chen's move was seamless, and the man couldn't find a single fault within it despite having a superior level of strength compared to Jian Chen. The two were at a standstill, but as the fight grew longer, so did his disadvantages. Since Jian Chen's sword was so fast, dodging each blow was consuming too much energy, although it wasn't too much of a problem right now. But if time went on any longer, he would suffer a defeat sooner or later. And since Jian Chen's sword was like lightning, the margin of time he had to defend himself was slowly shrinking along with his ability to retaliate. "Hail, Francis, come and help me. Tianfeng, go protect the young master and escort him out." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, the bodyguards protecting the youth changed expressions. They exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. They both clearly understood the strength of the middle-aged man, who was currently fighting Jian Chen. They hadn't ever imagined that even he, as one at the peak Saint Master level, would have to call for reinforcements. This really shocked them. They hadn't thought that Jian Chen, who didn't even look 20 years old, could have such strength. Chapter 128. Forest fight. The four bodyguards immediately split up, and two people began to charge at Jian Chen with their saint weapons raised. They quickly entered the battle, and began to attack Jian Chen together with the peak Saint Master strength middle-aged man. The bodyguards that had just joined were the troops' only two primary Saint Masters. With their entry, the pressure on Jian Chen immediately increased by a lot. However, with just his profound steps and his fast sword, he was still evenly matched with the three Saint Masters, and showed no signs of being at a disadvantage. The youth also felt a trace of fear. Under the protection of the other two peak Great Saint bodyguards, he quickly left the area. His figure soon disappeared without a trace. Although Jian Chen sensed the youth's departure, he didn't try to chase after him. The three Saint Master bodyguards in front of him definitely wouldn't allow him to leave and harm the young master of the Tianxiong clan. Jian Chen fought an intense battle against those three Tianxiong clan bodyguards in the forest. A lot of the surrounding fauna was affected by the battle, and soon, the entire area had become a mess. Quite a few thick and sturdy trees had even been cut in half. Once again dodging the large sword swinging toward him from the side, Jian Chen launched a fierce attack at the primary Saint Master, preparing to break through him. As the sound of the sword splitting the air rang out, Jian Chen's light wind sword suddenly turned into a blur as it quickly pierced toward the primary Saint Master, in the form of countless blades. This forced the man to panic, and caused him to have no time to reform his defense. Eventually, Jian Chen managed to form holes in the man's defense. Taking advantage of one of these holes, the light wind sword abruptly trembled as a silver flash of lightning pierced forward at a speed that was somewhat faster than before. Before the primary Saint Master could even react, the light wind sword had buried itself deep into the man's throat, the blood-soaked point poking out from the other side of the neck. Hail! Seeing the man be stabbed through the throat, the other two people's expressions suddenly changed as they shouted out in a tone mixed with grief. Jian Chen's arm didn't pause at all. Immediately after the light wind sword pierced through the man's throat, he pulled it right out, and instantly shifted his attention to the other two. His body flickered as he silently appeared in front of the primary Saint Master, without a trace, just like a demon. The light wind sword once again flashed like silver lightning, as it was thrust forward. The middle-aged man's expression completely changed. He immediately lifted his saint weapon, and held it in front of his throat when he saw the light wind sword heading towards him. Suddenly, the speeding light wind sword dropped downward, seemingly evading the large sword protecting the man's body, and began to pierce toward the man at a sharp incline from below his saint weapon. The middle-aged man was unable to react at all to the light wind sword's sudden change. Eventually, his eyes were filled with disbelief as the sword deeply pierced through his throat. At that moment, a biting cold wind blew past behind Jian Chen. A large 3-inch wide, two-handed sword slashed through the air with a powerful amount of saint force. Before it even reached Jian Chen, the wind pressure generated from it had already caused Jian Chen's clothes to stick tightly against his back. Feeling that chilly wind, Jian Chen immediately pulled out his sword from the man's throat and turned around to guard his front with his sword, without any hesitation. Clang! The large two-handed sword containing the powerful saint force fiercely collided with the light wind sword. The amount of energy it generated forced Jian Chen back a few steps. After sending Jian Chen backward with attack after attack, the middle-aged man's gaze shifted to the bodyguard that had already been pierced through the throat by Jian Chen. The crimson blood was currently surging outward like a fountain from the throat. As life began to gradually fade from his eyes, his expression was still frozen in disbelief. A moment later, his entire body slowly collapsed to the ground. With reddening eyes, the man glared at Jian Chen fiercely like a bloodthirsty, ferocious beast. He exploded in anger. Even if I die today, I have to kill and behead you as revenge for my brothers. Powerful saint force began to gather on the large sword in the middle-aged man's hands. He raised the sword tip up, and with a heavy push of his feet off the ground, he quickly charged at Jian Chen. Jian Chen's gaze hardened as he locked onto the middle-aged man. His grip on the light wind sword couldn't help but tighten. He had already seen the middle-aged man's plans to kill him. Faced with this peak saint master that was unafraid of death, Jian Chen was faced with some trouble. After all, his current strength was only at the middle great saint level. The difference between that and a peak saint master was still a pretty large gap. The layer of thick, hazy white light that surrounded the blade was evidently more dense than it had been before. Heavy yet penetrating sword chi was faintly released from the light wind sword. Just as the middle-aged man was about to charge forward, Jian Chen's right shoulder suddenly jolted, and the light wind sword in his hand split the air as it pierced outward. The needle-thin, silver-colored sword chi was shot out from the sword point, and sped toward the middle-aged man at a speed that made it hard to track with the naked eye. Seeing this slender yet dense amount of sword chi, the middle-aged man didn't dare to be careless. The sword flew at him so quickly that he didn't have time to dodge, so without any better options, the man could only release all of the saint force he had left into his sword as he swung it downwards. The moment the man's giant two-handed sword made contact with Jian Chen's sword chi-enhanced sword, the two-handed sword easily scattered apart the sword chi after some minor obstructions. At the same time, Jian Chen suddenly moved toward the man a few meters in front of him in a way that made him resemble a blur with his light wind sword ready to attack. The middle-aged man immediately retracted the large sword to block Jian Chen's attack. Afterward, the two began to fight intensely once more. In his previous world, Jian Chen's sword play had already reached the pinnacle, and even though this middle-aged man was stronger than him, the man's understanding of the ways of the sword was merely a drop in a bucket compared to him. His sword was at a speed thought to be inconceivable, and the way he used it had already reached a level of perfection. Against the stronger middle-aged man, he would not be able to go against Jian Chen's sword for much longer, since his defense wouldn't be able to keep up. Jian Chen began to attack every part of the man's body with quick precision. Using his light wind sword, it was already like a blur that was impossible to see the blade move. And with it, Jian Chen continued to quickly attack the man to the point where resisting was becoming a challenging task. In addition, every attack the light wind sword made was fatal. This forced the middle-aged man to lose his chances of heavily injuring Jian Chen, at the stake of getting wounded himself. At the moment, the middle-aged man extremely regretted his actions. At the same time, he bitterly hated the Tianxiong clan's young master. Originally, this journey had been completely incident-free. Unfortunately, this young master of the Tianxiong clan, who didn't know the difference between heaven and earth, had purposely decided to provoke this fiend in front of him. Innocently getting into some trouble was fine, but in the end, it had harmed them to the point where two of the brothers he'd known for dozens of years had died. In addition, he himself was now stuck in a dangerous situation. He most likely wouldn't even have a chance to live after today. For a while, the two people fought like flashes of lightning. Eventually, the middle-aged man was unable to block in time, and Jian Chen's viper-like light wind sword stabbed him in the heart. Chapter 129. Trouble at the door. Looking at the sword piercing towards his heart with sluggish eyes, the middle-aged man couldn't believe what he was seeing. Being defeated by a brat barely past the age of 20 years old with a strength that wasn't even at the peak great saint level was truly humiliating. Because of the arrogant talk of the Tianxiong clan's young master, his 50 years of cultivation had been laid to waste by a 20-year-old youth. Out in the middle of nowhere, his life was destroyed in a single moment. Just thinking about this fact made the man nearly cry out with grief. As his life essence slowly escaped from him, the man's bright and clear eyes slowly clouded over and rolled back into his skull as his sturdy body fell to the ground. Jian Chen slowly retracted his light wind sword. Blood flowed down the blade as if it were alive, slowly gathering at the tip before falling to the ground, drop by drop. After a few battles, the uneven dirt ground had become wet with blood. Jian Chen slowly caught his breath. Attacking two primary Saint Masters and a peak Saint Master consumed quite a bit of Jian Chen's energy. Faced with three opponents whose strength all surpassed his own, Jian Chen had already made an all-out effort. If it weren't for the fact that he had cultivated for a while, increasing his base strength as a middle great saint by quite a bit, he most likely would have spent a much longer time on trying to kill these three Saint Masters. However, after killing the three people, Jian Chen's grief from the deaths of Captain Kendall and the others had abated quite a bit. Jian Chen's gaze indifferently swept across the three corpses, before finally falling onto their space belts. After some hesitation, he slowly advanced forward to retrieve the belts and examine their contents. Because he had consumed over 100 times more monster cores than the average person in his cultivation, Jian Chen required a great amount of them. Moreover, Jian Chen clearly didn't have enough money to purchase such an extensive amount of monster cores. That's why the thing he wanted to acquire the most were monster cores. It was only possible for him to gain them by killing magical beasts, or by taking them from corpses. Besides, taking items from a dead person was an extremely common occurrence in Tianyuan continent. After all, 30% or more of the fights that happened on Tianyuan continent were because people were seeking another party's items. After removing the three space belts, Jian Chen inspected their contents. Although these three were Saint Masters, it was clear that they weren't wealthy. Aside from some everyday products and camping tools, they really didn't have anything else. In the end, Jian Chen was only able to fish out some 10 purple and gold coins, 15 Class 2 monster cores, and 5 Class 3 monster cores. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen stored the monster cores into his own space belt. His gaze shifted back to the 10 purple and gold coins, and he hesitated for a bit before finally taking those as well. Although it wasn't a large amount of money, to commoners it was still quite a bit of wealth. Just throwing it out here was a waste, and rather a pity. After storing everything, Jian Chen tossed the 3 space belts to one side. Without bothering to clean up the corpses, he directly left the area. By the time he had returned to Wake City, the sky had already darkened. After eating some food at the hotel, Jian Chen requested a room and went to sleep. Because Jian Chen had only requested a normal room, its layout was extremely simple. It had a single wooden table, a few chairs and a bed. Aside from these, there was nothing else present. However, the place was extremely neat and tidy. One could even say it was completely spotless. That night, the shining full moon suspended high up in the sky emitted bright rays of silver moonlight, filling the entire pitch-black sky with a faint silver color. Even the scattered, thin clouds could be seen clearly. Jian Chen moved his chair to the window side and sat there with his head raised. He looked up at that round moon emitting a bright glow while deep in thought. Perhaps it was more appropriate to say that he was in a sluggish daze. Jian Chen was constantly recalling the past 2 days in his mind. The Flame Mercenary Group had been hunted down by the Class 5 magical beast Golden Fur Tiger King. And eventually, the members had sacrificed their lives to hold the beast back, shielding Jian Chen so that he could flee. Although 2 days had already passed, and the grief from the deaths of the Flame Mercenaries had faded quite a bit, Jian Chen was still unable to forget the scene. That scenario had been branded deeply into the depths of his soul, and he would most likely never forget it for the rest of his life. It could be said that he and the Flame Mercenaries were strangers that had come together by chance. Although during the past few days, everyone's relationships had grown quite close, they had chosen to die for the sake of covering for Jian Chen and letting him flee. Although there were also some selfish motives for this, they all understood that faced by the pursuit of the Golden Fur Tiger King, they had absolutely no way of running away. Despite knowing this, their actions had still impacted Jian Chen's heart by quite a lot. Captain Kendall, what is your greatest wish? My greatest wish is to make the Flame Mercenary Group become the #1 mercenary group in the continent. A scene appeared in Jian Chen's mind as he sat next to the window. His originally lifeless eyes gradually recovered their vigor, tightly clenching his fists as he murmured, Captain Kendall, you were the strongest one in the Flame Mercenary Group. I had never imagined that back then. You'd be the first to depart. During these past few days, you were always the one that had cared for me the most. Now that you're gone, your life's greatest wish can no longer become true. In that case, let me make your wish come true in your stead. I, Jian Chen, swear that I will spend my life trying my utmost to make the Flame Mercenary Group the #1 mercenary group in the Tianyuan continent. Jian Chen said resolutely. Jian Chen untied the space belt that Captain Kendall had given him. He stared at the belt in his hand in a trance, as the memories of the words that Kendall had imparted to him when handing him this belt replayed in his mind. Jian Chen, don't refuse. If we can't leave this forest alive, then our families will all be under your care. If we all die here, then their lives will become incomparably painful. Whether or not my parents, my wife, and even my one child will be able to live through the days after my death will all depend on you. Jian Chen let out a long breath. He suddenly felt extremely guilty. Captain Kendall had given this space belt to him before his death, entrusting Jian Chen with his family's well-being. However, even now, Jian Chen still didn't know what the names of those in Captain Kendall's family were, or even where they lived. How was he supposed to act? Just then, Jian Chen's heart suddenly became filled with worry. If Captain Kendall had entrusted Jian Chen to take care of his family, Jian Chen guessed that Captain Kendall's family was definitely extremely impoverished. After losing Captain Kendall, their pillar of support, how could his family possibly live the rest of their lives happily? When thinking of how incomparably difficult Kendall's family's lives would be from now, Jian Chen's heart fell into panic. He wanted to find Kendall's family as soon as possible and give them whatever Captain Kendall had entrusted Jian Chen with in order to bless them with happy lives. Jianchen sat by the window for the latter half of the night, before eventually returning to his bed to cultivate. Right now Jianchen needed to grow stronger, and even stronger. The night was calm, and it quickly passed by without incident. The next morning Jianchen, who had been submerged in cultivation, suddenly opened his eyes. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a bad premonition in his heart. Jianchen got out of bed and walked up to the window to look outside. After a single glance, Jianchen's expression abruptly darkened. The outside of the hotel had been surrounded by hundreds of people wearing white robes. Every single one of them were identically dressed. From this, it could be seen that they represented a single power. Jianchen unexpectedly discovered that in the middle of the group of people was the young master of the Tianxiong clan that had escaped from him yesterday. Chapter 130. Trapped in the restaurant. Seeing the group of people outside the restaurant, Jianchen's expression immediately hardened. Since the moment he saw the young master of the Tianxiong clan standing in the middle, he had already guessed that the reason these people had gathered here so early in the morning was because of him. After all, yesterday he had not only committed an offense against the Tianxiong clan's young master, but also killed 3 of the clan's strong bodyguards. In short, he had already earned the hatred of the Tianxiong clan yesterday. After all, Peak Saint Masters still counted as very good hands in a remote place like Wake City. No matter in which clan in Wake City one was, Peak Saint Masters all had pretty high positions. If a clan lost a Peak Saint Master, as well as 2 primary Saint Masters, for no reason and didn't regain face, the clan's military power in the city would undoubtedly decrease by quite a lot. This was extremely important to a clan's future. Right now, the entire restaurant had been surrounded by the Tianxiong clan. Wanting to leave here without anyone knowing was impossible. Jianchen could only helplessly leave his room and walk toward the main entrance of the restaurant. Although he was getting closer to his doom, and the opposite party had hundreds of people as well as some strong experts, there wasn't a single trace of panic or concern in Jianchen's expression. He looked just as calm as he normally did. When Jianchen walked downstairs and arrived at the restaurant's lower floor, he discovered that there were already many people gathered there. It was currently the peak hours of breakfast, and all of the tables in the lobby were filled with bowls and dishes, emitting the fragrant aroma of meat. However, not a single person was sitting at those tables and enjoying the bountiful breakfast. Instead, they were all swearing as they stood up from their seats and slowly began to walk outside the door with indignant expressions. That Tianxiong clan is too damn arrogant. I was happily eating here before they suddenly commanded all of us to leave. Whatever random crap you guys do has nothing to do with us. We're just eating our own meals. It's not like we'd hinder you. That's right. That Tianxiong clan really thinks of themselves as Wake City's #1 clan. They've become undisciplined and out of control, even though they're just a small clan. When they encounter those famous experts in Tianyuan continent, they'll be eradicated with just a slight stretch of a finger. Most of the people eating in the restaurant were mercenaries. Some of the more short-tempered and braver ones grumbled as they left, but they said their complaints quite softly, as if murmuring to themselves. Not a single person dared to say it out loud. Despite this, the soldiers were all at a certain level of strength, and could hear the murmurs loud and clear. The majority of the few merchants in the restaurant didn't dare to show any signs of dissatisfaction in their expressions. They obediently left their seats and hurriedly walked out of the restaurant. Only the merchants that had certain amounts of strength were left. They all had expressions of extreme dissatisfaction. They were pretty much all foreigners, and although they weren't afraid of the Tianxiong clan, a strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake. It was clear that they wouldn't go against the Tianxiong clan over such a minor thing and stir up more trouble for themselves. Thus, they eventually all walked out of the restaurant as well. There were 4 white-robed middle-aged men guarding the restaurant entrance. Their powerful, electric-like gazes unceasingly scanned the people leaving. Although they had also heard a few of the mercenaries curse the Tianxiong clan in dissatisfaction, they didn't dare to say a single word, and acted as if they hadn't heard the curses. Quite a few of the mercenaries in the restaurant were foreigners that had some level of power backing them up. or were a part of a mercenary group. Although the Tianxiong clan proclaimed itself as a leading clan in Wake City, they didn't want to upset any outside powers, because some of them were so powerful that even the Tianxiong clan couldn't afford to provoke them. Soon, the restaurant's customers had all left. In such a large restaurant, the only ones remaining were some servants standing there in a daze, at a loss of what to do. The restaurant owner also stood to one side with an expression of concern, as he stared unblinkingly at the vacant restaurant. His face revealed the pain that he was unable to voice out. Quite a bit of income had disappeared. At that moment, the only one still in the restaurant aside from the owner and the servants was Jian Chen. Even the customers that had been resting on the upper floor had been forcefully oppressed and brought out by the restaurant's servants. Jian Chen sat on a chair with a leisurely expression, staring with interest at the group of Tianxiong clans, people still holding fort outside the restaurant. His expression was completely relaxed. Although Jian Chen seemed to be carefree on the outside, he had actually put up his guard ages ago. After all, this time they had arrived with ill intentions. Moreover, he clearly sensed that there were quite a few powerful experts among these people. At that moment, the young master of the Tianxiong clan that Jian Chen had encountered yesterday in Magical Beast Mountain Range walked into the restaurant with the protection of a large group of people. As soon as he entered the restaurant, the young master's gaze fell onto the sneering Jian Chen sitting on the chair. A sinister look flashed in the young master's eyes. "Brat, I didn't expect that you'd still be here today. Yesterday I let you off. Today I'll pull you out from your roots," the young master said with a cold smile. He looked at Jian Chen and said, "What about it? Are you scared? Do you regret it now?" The group of Tianxiong clan members standing behind the youth all sharply looked at Jian Chen. Jian Chen lightly snorted in disdain. His gaze swept across the crowd of people standing behind the young master as he said, "Don't tell me that you think this amount of people is enough to scare me? You're being a bit too self-confident." The young master of the Tianxiong clan sneered back as he said, "You're even more arrogant than I thought. However, I can't help but admire your ability to talk big. Even at a moment like this, you still won't admit your mistake or kneel down and beg me for mercy. Could it be that you think you can walk away alive today in front of so many of Tianxiong clan's experts? Furthermore, I brought at least 100 people with me today," the young master said with unrivaled confidence. In his opinion, he would definitely devour Jian Chen today. Jian Chen couldn't help but smile faintly at these words. Just now, he had suddenly discovered that talking with a hedonistic son of rich parents like him, who had never been out in the world, was an extremely amusing thing to do. "Then do you believe me when I say that not only will I leave here today, but I will also break all of your soldiers at the same time?" Jian Chen's tone gradually turned darker as he spoke. Chapter 131, Death Siege 1. Hearing Jian Chen's haughty words, the young master of the Tianxiong clan couldn't help but laugh. He stared at Jian Chen like he was stupid before sneering in disdain. "Just you alone? Fine then. I'll see for myself if you can escape from this entrapment. Show me how many casualties you can inflict on these Tianxiong clan mercenaries with your abilities." The young master had brought over 100 mercenaries, with at least half of them being of the great saint level. There were also around a dozen saint masters, so he did not believe that this guy would be able to run away from them at all. Without wanting to waste any more breath on such superfluous talk with Jian Chen, the young master waved his hand and commanded, "Charge! I want this arrogant brat to be taught a good lesson." The few mercenaries by the young master's side looked at each other. One person sneered, "It's merely a brat, there's no need for all of us to make a move." Turning toward one of the Tianxiong representative mercenary troops, he commanded, "You guys go bring that brat over." "Yes, sir." Following the man's orders without any hesitation, the group immediately walked 10 meters forward to where Jian Chen was. With a cold glare, one of the mercenaries growled, "Kid, it'd be best if you just obediently let yourself be captured and return with us to the Tianxiong clan. This way you'll suffer less. Otherwise, I can guarantee you'll be in for a lot of pain." Jian Chen held his head up high and stood at his original position defiantly. This was a time where he could show off his ability, and the silver light wind sword gradually materialized in his hand. In that instant, the aura around Jianxin completely changed. Everyone from the Tianxiong clan could tell what Jianxin was planning on doing based on his action. Attack! The man who spoke previously cried out, causing the group of mercenaries to call out their saint weapons as they charged toward Jianxin. Jianxin had a look of disdain on his face. To Jianxin, who could even kill experts of the saint master level, these mere saint users weren't worth even looking at. The moment the several people neared Jianxin, the light wind sword suddenly turned into a blurry mirage and quickly pierced out in the form of multiple phantom swords. At the same time, the assaulters came to a screeching halt as trickles of blood began to pour from their throats. Then, faint traces of blood gradually appeared, and finally, dyed their clothes a bloody red as it suddenly burst out from their throats. In the end, all the men collapsed at the same time. The expressions of the few mercenaries standing by the young master simultaneously changed, and they exchanged glances. They could tell from the gaze in their opponent's eyes that he was extremely serious. The men that had died were saint-level cannon fodder, who were used to scout out Jianxin's strength. No one really felt their deaths a shame. However, when they saw the technique Jianxin had used to kill the people, their hearts sank. In that moment, they could only see the faint image of his sword. Jianxin's was so fast that they could barely see it with their vision. In a flash, Jianxin had killed a group of mercenaries from the Tianxiong clan, immediately dominating over everyone present. Although the restaurant was overflowing with people, it was engulfed in a pin-drop silence. Tianxiong clan's group of mercenaries all looked at Jianxin in a daze. They hadn't thought that someone as young as Jianxin could fight against so many people from their clan with ease. He had even dared to kill the hired mercenaries right in front of the Tianxiong clan. This was truly shocking and unexpected. The Tianxiong clan had dominated Wake City for over a dozen years. Although they had clashed with many different mercenaries, they had never fought against someone of Jianxin's age, who had dared to fight by himself. This was a first in the entire history of Wake City. After a small amount of hesitation, the white-robed man next to the young master said in a low voice, "Dear fellow, I don't know where you came from or what teacher you are taught under, but why must you oppose the Tianxiong clan?" Jianxin's display of strength at such a young age had revealed him to be a high-leveled expert, and the experts of the Tianxiong clan couldn't even make a guess on who was backing him up. They were all afraid that Jianxin had the support of someone they couldn't afford to offend. If they did, then it would perhaps bring a great amount of trouble for the Tianxiong clan. It was possible that the Tianxiong clan that had dominated Wake City for so long would be eliminated, just like that. This wasn't a result that any of them were willing to see. Although these mercenaries were employed by the Tianxiong clan, and were not really affiliated with them, they weren't treated all that badly. After being employed by the clan for so long, the mercenaries had developed a few feelings for the clan, and none of them had any desire to see it be condemned to extinction over such a small matter. Jianxin sneered. Thanks to his experience as a traveler in his previous world, he had immediately guessed what the man was trying to get at. "I am a lone traveler. Where I come from is no importance to you all. As for who my teacher is, I'm sorry, but up until this day, I have never had a teacher. Lastly, it was your Tianxiong clan that provoked me first. Since when did it change to me being the one who made conflict?" Jianxin laughed coldly. Hearing that, the few middle-aged men immediately let loose a breath. Afterwards, the man that had previously talked continued, "Then you'd best come back to the Tianxiong clan with us. Otherwise, we won't show the smallest amount of mercy toward you. If you come out of this missing an arm or leg, it would be bad." After seeing Jianxin dispatch the group of mercenaries without any effort, these men didn't have any strong desires to fight against him. Although they had confidence that they could capture Jianxin, the lightning-like speed of his sword was something they was afraid of. If they were to get hurt, there was no way their profits would surpass their gains. If they could capture Jianxin without much effort, they would be extremely happy. "In your dreams," Jianxin sneered. His right arm shook as the light wind sword quickly danced in the air, its tip flying toward the group of people. A large amount of sword chi enveloped the sword once more as Jian Chen said, "Speak less bullshit. If you want to do something, then hurry up." Jian Chen's provocation infuriated the entire Tianxiong clan. The young master had long since lost his patience. He immediately waved his hand as he roared, "Why are you guys just standing there? Hurry up and capture him." Although this group of people standing next to the young master did not have low status or positions, it was obvious that their backbone was still the young master of the Tianxiong clan. The moment the words left his mouth, this group of people began to charge forward. Chapter 132. Death Siege 2. A strong killing aura flashed through Jian Chen's eyes. Not waiting for the Tianxiong clan to advance any further, he lifted his own sword to attack. With a speed almost invisible to the naked eye, the light wind sword flashed out at the swords approaching Jian Chen. Against such a fast sword, even the stronger people in the group weren't able to properly defend themselves. The moment the sword finished its downward arc, the mercenaries had immediately fallen to the ground. A small trickle of blood flowed silently from their throats and stained the ground beneath them an iridescent red color. But the Tianxiong clan had brought over 100 people, so the deaths of such a small amount of people was of no concern to them. Another group began to charge rampantly toward Jian Chen with sounds so loud that their stampeding echoed. Seeing the group of people that didn't seem to know death charge forward, Jian Chen's glare turned cooler. With a sigh, he increased the speed of his sword thrusts, and each one of the mercenaries found their throats stabbed. In their hearts, they knew this was a fatal blow, and that there was not a single amount of mercy to be found within Jian Chen. Even though Jian Chen knew that the Tianxiong clan was a major clan in Wake City, he wasn't at all afraid of matters like this. Now that he was by himself once more, he didn't have anyone behind him he had to worry about, so there was nothing to be anxious about. Jian Chen's petite body constantly wove through his attackers as his light wind sword endlessly flashed around. With every arc of his sword, another person would fall, and thanks to his fierce battle strength, the entire restaurant had become a place of chaos. The chairs and tables that were previously organized neatly were now scattered about, while the fragrant dishes of food had crashed and spilled to the ground. As fast as a demon, Jian Chen quickly dispatched mercenary after mercenary. Within the span of a few seconds, another 10 mercenaries had fallen, never to rise again. It was almost as if Jian Chen had eyes on the back of his head that could observe everything on the battleground. Every single time a mercenary swung his saint weapon, Jian Chen would barely dodge the danger at the critical point. He was a single man facing dozens of people, but even after fighting for some time, he hadn't received any wounds. Even as the mercenaries tried their hardest to slash at him, Jian Chen's clothes didn't even have the slightest tear. Seeing his mercenaries fall to the floor one by one without Jian Chen sustaining any wounds, the young master of the Tianxiong clan scowled with dissatisfaction before cursing. "This group is useless. Everyone here is good for nothing. I didn't know that my father had raised such a useless amount of trash, that even a dozen of them couldn't seize a single person." He shook his head, turned to look at the man to his side before barking out, "What are you and your men standing around for? Hurry up and capture him. Once he is taken back to the Tianxiong clan, I will show him my awesomeness. Humph, anyone that's insulted me has never gotten away with it. He won't be an exception." The group of people the young master had yelled at was all the strongest mercenaries. With their statuses, they would definitely be highly respected, even in the Tianxiong clan. After not being given face by the young master as he yelled at them, they couldn't help but feel annoyed. The men looked at each other before one of them spoke out. "Although this person is young, he is extraordinarily strong. His movements and the speed of his sword are incomparably fast. Even if it were us going against him, we would have difficulty as well. Moreover, all of his sword strikes so far have been fatal. If the mercenaries did not die by a sword through their throats, then they died from having their hearts pierced. From this, you can see that this person is not simple at all. Facing him head-on right now would be an unwise decision, and we may even get injured. For now, it would be best to call a few people over for him to waste his saint force over." The moment he uses up all of his saint force, we will strike and win easily. Not bad, I approve of this suggestion. The man's suggestion had been quickly endorsed by the other mercenaries. Although this would increase the amount of casualties among the Tianxiong clan, the responsibility of that would fall upon the young master himself, and not the mercenaries themselves. And since this second-generation master didn't care for them at all, they weren't willing to throw away their lives for him. If it meant throwing away the lives of others to persevere their own lives, they would do it. Following up, another squad of mercenaries entered the restaurant to kill Jianchen. The people in this group were of the great saint level, so they were stronger than the previous group by a large margin. Jianchen immediately engaged the great saints in a fierce battle against a group who was much stronger than before. Jianchen's pressure had greatly increased. He would not be able to fight as easily as before. As the fighting grew more and more intense, the entire restaurant became even more ruined. All of the surrounding walls had holes kicked through them, causing the entire restaurant to be on the verge of collapsing. Outside of the restaurant, a large crowd of people had gathered and were passionately gossiping about the fight that was happening inside. Inside the restaurant, in a brilliant flash of silver, Jianchen stabbed one of the great saints in the heart, killing him instantly. Stamping on the chest of the man, he sent the body flying backward, creating yet another hole in the walls of the restaurant before the body flew out. The restaurant shuddered violently once more, each sway stronger than the last. Finally, the loud crunching sounds of wood could be heard as it trembled once more. Jianchen nimbly dodged the blades of 3 saint weapons, while looking at the wobbling pillars of the restaurant. Without any hesitation, he pushed the mercenaries away as he escaped from the newly created hole, out onto the streets. Chase after him. Don't let him get away. The moment he saw Jianchen leave the restaurant, the young master cried out at the mercenaries to chase after him. After the young master had spoken out, the group of mercenaries next to him had also cried out. Not good, the restaurant's about to collapse. Escort the young master away to safety. Immediately, a middle-aged man grabbed the young master by the shoulders before bringing him out of the way of the collapsing restaurant. Everyone else followed closely behind. The moment the group ran out of the restaurant, the entire restaurant caved in. In that moment, the mercenaries that didn't make it in time were buried. Soon after, a silver ray of light came flying toward the young master of the Tianxiong clan. Chapter 133. The Death of the Young Master of the Tianxiong clan. Young master, be careful. The middle-aged man cried out as he discovered the trajectory of the flashing white light. His face grew paler by 2 shades as he realized the sword was going too fast. With the sword already a meter from the young master's throat, under this type of situation, there was simply no time to react. PCHH, because of the lightning-like sword strike, the barely saint-level young master practically had no chance to react, and so the light-wind sword stabbed itself deeply into his throat. The young master of the Tianxiong clans widened his eyes as he looked dead-on at the sword in his throat. There was a look of disbelief. He was not expecting this outcome at all. To think that this depressed little mercenary he had come across on the road to the magical Beast Mountain range would unexpectedly be the one to end his life. If he had known about this before, he wouldn't have dared to come close to Jianchen. But it was a shame that there was no such thing as a regret pill in this world for him to eat. Right now, his destiny was all but confirmed, and there was a better chance for him to alter the mountain range's landscape than this. Seeing their young master already have his throat pierced, the mercenaries by his side all stared in great shock. Some had even paled instantaneously. They were fully aware that the person in front of them was the young master of the Tianxiong clan, who was dearly loved by the clan leader. He was also the successor of the clan when the time came, so to see their young master be killed right in front of their eyes, they couldn't believe it. If the clan leader were to hear of this news, no one knew how furious he would become, and how severe their penalties would be. Just thinking about the severe temper of the Tianxiong clan leader had sent shivers among all of the mercenaries. Each one of them began to look at Jianchen with rage. If they weren't able to bring Jianchen back with them, Then they would be served as a substitute instead. Brat, you've killed our young master, prepare to die. All of the mercenaries began to charge at Jianchen without hesitation while shouting out. All Tianxiong mercenaries, surround him immediately. Don't let him escape. These mercenaries all held high statuses in the Tianxiong clan. So the moment they spoke, every other members of the Tianxiong clan threw away their hesitation and immediately surrounded Jianchen from all four sides. At the same time, everyone that had been watching quickly distanced themselves further away. Even under the collapsed restaurant, a stream of mercenaries crawled out looking disheveled, but they continued to join the other mercenaries. Every single mercenary in the vicinity had seen with their own eyes the death of their young master by the hands of Jianchen, so they fully understood the gravity of the situation. Everyone took a step back in order to divert attention from themselves. At this moment, no one was willing to go and inform the clan leader. They were afraid of being implicated in the death of the young master and suffering the wrath in place of Jianchen. After landing the killing blow on the young master, Jianchen had immediately started to fight with the middle-aged mercenaries. These mercenaries were of the Saint Master level, and 3 of them were even at the peak Saint Master level. Against so many Saint Masters, the pressure was on full blast, causing Jianchen to have to go all out. Jianchen and the mercenaries continued to exchange blows in an endless storm of blades and fists that left the mercenaries flustered. Taking advantage of the situation, Jianchen had used his light wind sword and immediately stabbed one of the mercenaries through his heart. The moment Jianchen had stabbed into the middle-aged man's heart, a big axe had landed onto his left shoulder, leaving behind a wound that trickled and dyed his clothes red with blood. Feeling an immense amount of pain in his left shoulder, Jianchen's face immediately whitened. Pulling out his sword from the man's chest, he rapidly thrusted it at the mercenary with the axe. Seeing the silver flash of the light wind sword, the man with the axe immediately narrowed his eyes in concentration and brought his weapon up in front to receive the blow. At the moment of impact, the man was thrown backward by the explosive force. Ding! The tip of the light wind sword had stabbed into the blade of the axe, but thanks to the amount of sword chi around the sword, it had left a noticeable dent in the glossy blade. A sharp metallic sound was heard as 5 saint weapons immediately headed toward Jianchen at the same time, while cutting off any possible escape routes for Jianchen. The amount of saint force that was radiating from each weapon was enough to cause a massive amount of air fluctuations. Jianchen's eyes flashed in annoyance, as the amount of sword chi on his light wind sword was increased several times over, making the sword seem even hazier than before. In a flash he struck out at the 5 saint weapons and struck each one with a clang. While the light wind sword had stopped the 5 saint weapons, Jianchen's face grew white slightly as his right arm began to shake marginally. This combined strike was the unified strength of all 5 mercenaries, which would be extremely difficult to accept with ease. Because of the large amount of force put behind the 5 mercenaries, Jianchen's entire right arm had gone numb, as even his inner organs had been temporarily shaken. Ha! Angrily shouting out. The Saint Masters didn't dare let Jianchen have the opportunity to breathe and rest. Once more striking at him, these mercenaries were extraordinarily clever. Unless there was a hole in their attack pattern, Jianchen would find it hard to defend himself without getting seriously harmed. A fierce expression revealed itself on Jianchen's face as he unexpectedly stood in front of the 5 saint weapons. His light wind sword then transformed in a silver streak of light as it flew at the closest person at breakneck speed. PCH. The light wind sword met no obstructions as it penetrated the man's throat. At the same time, the 5 saint weapons that were on the verge of cutting into him had their saint force already about to touch his clothes. In a split second, Jianchen's body twisted in a way that had dodged 3 of the saint weapons, but the remaining 2 had struck him on the back and waist. Jianchen stifled a shout as his already white face grew even more pale. He immediately pulled his sword from the throat of one of the mercenaries and looked at the remaining fighters. He threw away the idea of continuing to fight zealously and began to plan his way of escape from this area. Jianchen clearly understood that the Tianxiong clan had a formidable amount of power. The longer he stayed here, the more unfavorable his position would be. With his current strength, he would only be able to fight against a Saint Master. If the Tianxiong clan had a great Saint Master, he would be in trouble. However, with his remaining amount of strength, it would not be enough to defend himself. Sensing Jian Chen's plan to escape, one of the remaining Saint Masters immediately cried out, "Block him quickly! Don't let him escape!" Chapter 134. Wrath of the Tianxiong clan. Sensing that Jian Chen was planning to escape, one of the remaining Saint Masters immediately cried out, "Block him quickly! Don't let him escape!" The vigilant mercenaries surrounding the Saint Masters and Jian Chen immediately charged forward to block Jian Chen heroically. The saint weapons in their hands immediately came down toward Jian Chen, and despite knowing how exceptionally strong Jian Chen was, those who came forward to block him were not afraid at all. Jian Chen's legs blurred slightly, causing him to deviate from his original path and onto the side. Dodging the numerous saint weapons, his right arm shook as his light wind sword danced wildly all around. One by one, the mercenaries that had tried to block him fell to the ground. How would saints or great saints be able to defend against Jian Chen's usage of the profound steps? Despite being injured and having his fighting ability lowered, if Jian Chen were to use his entire strength, these mercenaries still wouldn't have a chance. After killing the mercenaries with lightning speed, Jian Chen twisted his body without any hesitation and began to run away from the mercenaries, as if possessed by a demon. As for the people that were observing the fight, they immediately left the road as soon as they saw him charge straight at them. It was almost as if they were afraid of obstructing Jian Chen and meeting the same fate the Tianxiong clan members had. Jian Chen had fought against the Tianxiong clan by himself while killing a few high-ranking experts, and even 2 peak Saint Masters, completely unafraid of the Tianxiong clan. The fact that he had even killed the young master of the clan had scared the mercenaries so much that they didn't dare to provoke him. In fact, some people had started to see him as a person with the strength of a great Saint Master. This type of person was rare to see even in a large group of mercenaries. Jian Chen was moving at an extraordinary speed. In a short moment, he was already 30 meters away from the group of mercenaries watching him. At that moment, because there wasn't enough time, the mercenaries that were watching him simply weren't fast enough to open a path for him. Just as Jian Chen was about to reach the group of mercenaries, his 2 feet suddenly stomped on the ground, pushing his entire body into the air. His feet still in a running position, the amount of force behind his leap was tremendous, sending him flying 10 meters away from the mercenaries. The moment his body touched the ground, Jian Chen began to run away from them once more. After him! Hurry up and chase him. Don't let him escape. Catch him quickly. He's trying to escape from the city. Someone send a message to the city military officers to close the gates. A collection of furious, impatient shouts were heard as the mercenaries charged in from behind with deafening sounds. The few Saint Masters had followed Jian Chen's actions and leapt over the observers before quickly disappearing into the streets. The great saint and saint-level mercenaries quickly followed behind. Roar! Not too long after they entered the streets, the angry snarl of a magical beast could be heard from behind. The roar caused the entire street to shake, almost as if there was an earthquake. The mercenaries that were still standing around to watch suddenly cleared the road as an ox-like magical beast came charging through. Mounted on top of the magical beast was a sturdy, middle-aged man wearing a gold-embroidered robe. From his appearance, he looked to be approaching his 50s, and his serious expression made him seem even more imposing. His pupils, as dark as the night itself, shone with a cold glare that made many of the weaker mercenaries unable to look at him in the face. In a remote city like Wake City, people that had the ability to ride magical beasts were a very rare sight. One thing was for sure, however. If the person who was riding a magical beast was not a high-leveled expert, then it was a person from a noble clan. That was because only these 2 types of people could typically use magical beasts as mounts. Following behind the middle-aged magical beast rider was a group of about 50 people. Each member stood in a clean formation with a serious expression, and they looked like soldiers who were well trained. The exact moment the middle-aged man came into view, everyone's eyes focused in on him. The entire area descended into a strange silence. But soon after, the observing mercenaries all began to comment to each other. Isn't that the Tianxiong clan's leader, Tianxiong Lai? I didn't think he'd arrive so soon. It is said that not only is the Tianxiong clan the strongest clan in Wake City, but the clan leader is also extremely strong. He has already reached the middle Great Saint Master realm, and also possesses a defense based on his Earth attribute Saint Force as well. In all of Wake City, there are very few people that can contend against the Tianxiong clan's Tianxiong Lai. The young master of the Tianxiong clan is the result of years of hard work by Tianxiong Lai. It was with great difficulty that he had raised a son. It could even be said just giving birth to him was difficult enough. Ever since the young master's birth, Tianxiong Lai had treated him like an expensive treasure. I don't know how angry Tianxiong Lai will become after finding out his son has been killed. His son had been the only candidate for passing on Tianxiong clan's legacy. Tianxiong Lai, who was sitting on the magical beast, stared down at the mercenaries below him with a frosty glare. However, the moment his eyes fell on the white-robed youth on the floor, his eyes suddenly went rigid as an intense killing intent flooded out of him. His face began to grow red, even his breathing became laborious, and his facial expression changed to one of disbelief. Kong Air! Tianxiong Lai cried out with a slight tremble in his voice. Jumping down from his mount, he ran over to where his son lay with wide eyes. Tianxiong Lai's face paled rapidly as he studied the all-too-familiar face on the ground with a look of utter shock. Kong Air! Tianxiong Lai cried out in anguish as he shook the youth's shoulder with both his hands. Feeling the icy body, Tianxiong Lai's heart felt like it had shattered. From his vast amount of experience, he already knew that this person had already stopped breathing and died. Kong Air! Kong Air! Tianxiong Lai continued to cry out in sorrow as tears began to flow from his eyes. His clear tears fell from his eyes, slowly flowing down his son's steadfast face, and eventually falling to the ground and breaking. Tianxiong Kong was the sole heir to Tianxiong Lai. Because of an injury to his body, he had long since been rendered unable to have children. But this child had been his proudest achievement, and he had always doted on this son of his. Since it was impossible for him to have children, Tianxiong Kong was the clan's darling treasure. But now that Tianxiong Lai's pride and joy were suddenly killed, his heart had been attacked and crushed in a way that was impossible to describe with words. Tianxiong Lai looked to be around 40 to 50 years old, but that was because of the normal life expectancy of those on the Tianyuan continent, as well as his cultivation. In reality, he was already within his 70s, and with the injuries he had sustained earlier in life, he was utterly incapable of reproducing. Who was it that killed my Kong Air? No matter who it is, Tianxiong Lai will rip their body apart into 1,000 pieces. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.